Chapter 248. Within the light god's domain, Long Houchin could cast all light magic instantaneously, even forbidden spells. At the same time, his own spiritual power consumption was reduced to an extremely low level. After casting the half-trial light, the Holy Unicorn's horn once again released holy light, dyeing Long Houchin's body in 7 colors. It looked like they were combining to form a divine artifact. Long Houchin pointed with his right hand again, and a strange white halo spread out from the light god's domain. A strange scene appeared. When the 4 chimera star Jade's domain of the 4 elements came into contact with this white halo, it actually melted rapidly like snow meeting boiling water. It didn't even spit out a breath, and instead focused on stabilizing its domain. This is Elemental Annihilation Halo? Qin Hongba was shocked. He never knew that the Elemental Annihilation Halo could be so powerful that it could even weaken a domain. Of course, this was not a simple Elemental Annihilation Halo. It should be called the Light God's Descent Elemental Annihilation Halo. With the amplification of the Light God's domain, the Elemental Annihilation Halo was already strong enough to be close to the level of a forbidden spell. Moreover, it had a strong restraining effect on various elements, and it happened to suppress the Star Jade's domain. Long Houchin's Light God's domain could only resist against Yang Haoyu, whose cultivation was much higher than his. However, it was completely different against Qin Hongba, whose cultivation was similar to his. He was also trying out the various wonderful uses of his light god's domain. The Elemental Annihilation Halo that was close to the level of a forbidden spell only consumed 10,000 spiritual power points. With the throbbing of the heart of eternity, the 10,000 spiritual power points were recovered in just 3 beats. Seeing that the effects of the Elemental Annihilation Halo were better than he had imagined, Long Houchin suddenly had a hint of enlightenment. This time he pointed his index fingers to the sky, and at the same time, the heart of eternity in his chest throbbed rapidly. One could clearly see circles of golden light spreading out from Long Houchin's body at an astonishing speed. This was clearly a state where spiritual power was released to an extreme extent. The light god's domain fluctuated violently. The light god's domain, which originally covered a large area, suddenly became flat, a completely circular surface. It looked like a girl's long skirt that was fluttering in the air when she spun rapidly. Of course, her buttocks were not exposed. The golden circular surface of light became more and more solid. Long Houchin moved his right hand, and the circular light god domain actually separated from his body. It was obvious that he was struggling. Beads of sweat had appeared on his forehead. When the light god's domain completely left his body and floated in the air, Long Houchin's heart of eternity was beating at an extremely high rate. Even the spectators outside could hear the powerful heartbeat. Layers of rainbow-colored halos continuously spread from the Holy Unicorn's body. Clearly, it was doing its best to strengthen Long Houchin. Just what kind of skill was this that required such a huge amount of spiritual energy? Qin Hongba was the most surprised. In terms of domains, he had originally thought that his 4 elemental domain, which had fused with the Star Jades, could suppress Long Houchin's light god's domain. But only when they clashed did he realize that his judgment was wrong. Yes, the fusion of the 4 natural elements should be stronger than light, but that was under the situation where they were of the same quality. Long Houchin's light god's domain was really too pure. That extremely pure light element was already on a completely different level from the elements of his 4 elemental domain. When the Elemental Annihilation Halo appeared, his domain was immediately suppressed. And at this moment, Long Houchin actually turned his domain into a huge circular light sheet that had a diameter of 100 meters and floated in the air. What was he doing? The oppression of the light god's domain had completely disappeared, and there was no longer any conflict with his 4 elemental domain. But the more it was like this, the more dangerous Qin Hongba felt. The 4 heads of the 4-headed chimera star Jades roared angrily at the same time, and 4 bolts of lightning shot out at the same time. They turned into a huge 4-colored lightning bolt in the air and bombarded towards Long Houchin. This was Qin Hongba's trump card. Although there wasn't much casting time, just this attack alone had consumed more than a third of the spiritual energy that he had fused with the Star Jades. The power had already surpassed an ordinary forbidden spell. At the same time, in order to protect himself, he controlled the 4 elemental domain to shrink to an area of 30 meters in front of him. The golden circular sheet lowered slightly in the air, and the edge of the circular sheet happened to come into contact with the 4-colored lightning bolt. A strange, buzzing sound suddenly appeared in the hearts of everyone in the Sanctuary Alliance great trial field. Immediately after, they saw that the 4-colored lightning bolt was actually split apart. As the circular sheet of light rotated in the air, the 4-colored lightning bolt that seemed to be extremely powerful suddenly separated into 4 different colored lightning bolts, just like before they fused. In the next instant, they dispersed in the strange, buzzing sound. At the same time, the golden sheet of light gradually moved forward and came into contact with the 4 elemental domain that had shrunk. A terrifying scene appeared. The 4 elemental domain was actually split apart by the golden sheet of light. The sheet of light seemed to have entered an uninhabited area, and it gradually cut into the 4 elemental domain. The collision of the elements caused the 4-headed chimera to emit a layer of 4-colored fog, and its body also retreated a few steps. At this moment, the Type 9 powerhouses could vaguely see the principle behind Long Houchin's circular sheet of light. It was actually rotating at an extremely high speed, and it was even trembling. What was more terrifying was that it was imbued with the effects of the forbidden spell Elemental Annihilation Halo. Under such circumstances, how terrifying would its cutting power be? This was clearly domain technique. Li Jingji blurted out. Yesterday, Long Houchin had displayed his evolved domain under Yang Haoyu's pressure. Today, he had once again given everyone a surprise, using the Light God's domain to activate his domain technique. If Long Houchin had told them that this domain technique had actually appeared in his mind, it was unknown if anyone would believe him. But in reality, that was the case. Furthermore, Long Houchin could clearly feel that if he could make this circular sheet of light shrink, then the might of this domain technique would become even more terrifying. The principle behind this domain technique was very simple. It was the effect of Long Houchin's self-created light ripple and the elemental annihilation halo to control the light god's domain. It sounded simple, but it was extremely difficult to execute. If not for Long Houchin's light god physique, and the fact that he could control the light god's domain, how would he be able to use his domain technique to execute a technique and form his own unique domain technique? At this point, the outcome of the match had been decided. Although Chen Hongba's natal fusion with Xing Xian was powerful, his domain technique was still suppressed by the light god's domain. In terms of spiritual power recovery, he could not compare to Long Houchin. Coupled with this domain technique that was already superior to his, he had no other choice but to admit defeat. Seeing that the high-speed, rotating, and terrifying light blade was not far in front of him, Chen Hongba was extremely unwilling to give up the match. When Xing Xian's 4 heads shouted, "Admit defeat," Long Houchin was also shocked. Only then did he understand that Chen Hongba had actually used a secret technique to fuse with his natal magical beast. In this way, even if he summoned Haoyue, the bloodline suppression effect would not be as strong. The 4-headed chimera returned to the light door dejectedly. In the next moment, when Chen Hongba walked out of the light door again, his expression became even uglier. He was a person who cared a lot about his reputation. It was not easy for him to accept being defeated by a young man like Long Houchin in front of the powerhouses of the 6 great temples. However, the truth was right in front of him. What else could he do? He could not defeat Long Houchin. What was the name of your domain technique? Chen Hongba asked in a low voice. Long Houchin was stunned for a moment and said, "Domain technique?" Yes, wasn't what he had just comprehended a domain technique? Let's call it divine light waltz. Divine light waltz? Chan Hongba snorted and returned to the Soul Temple without looking back. Sanchue Popo welcomed her husband back. Seeing his embarrassed expression, she couldn't help but laugh and said, "All right, why are you angry with a young man? You are not the first to be defeated by him. Even Yang Haoyu and Chiu Yonghao were defeated. There is nothing to be ashamed of." Chen Hongba snorted and said, "Still not ashamed? How old is he?" Sanchue Popo glared at him and said, "Are you still going all out? Do you want me to say that having ambition doesn't mean being old, and having no ambition, living 100 years in vain? You old thing, hurry up and go back. I'm telling you, don't cause trouble for the children." Chin Hongba's heart shivered. Although Sanchue Popo's words weren't pleasant to hear, she was reminding him that, without a doubt, in this temple competition, the strength that Long Haochen and the light of Dawn Monster Hunters had displayed would definitely allow them to have a decisive position in the new alliance that was about to be reorganized. Especially this Long Haochen, and Channing was his companion. His husband was reminding him not to let his attitude affect the originally unbreakable friendship between them. Thinking back to when Long Haochen and the others didn't hesitate to risk their lives to fight against the dragon rider demon god Asmodeus in order to help Chin Hongba's expression eased up. However, he still wasn't willing to admit defeat and said, "I was really born at the wrong time. If it wasn't for that little bastard Long Haochen, our family's would be the leading figure of the new generation." In fact, what he said wasn't wrong, but there was another premise. Not only Long Haochen, there was also Kai Chan was also a heavens favored one of the generation with an innate internal spiritual power of over 90. However, in terms of personality, her leadership ability was still lacking compared to Long Haochen and Kai. This was an era where talents came forth in large numbers. Not to mention that these most outstanding talents were all gathered together. Long Haochen returned to his seat and immediately closed his eyes, silently thinking about the divine light waltz that he had just displayed. This was completely an ability that he had displayed in an instant, and it was also the first domain technique that he possessed. Only when he truly displayed a domain technique could he truly feel how powerful it was. Chan Hongba, who had fused with the four-headed chimera, was already close to the peak of the 3rd level of the 9th level. However, in the face of Long Haochen's domain technique, he was still helpless and could only admit defeat in the end. However, Long Haochen's mastery of his divine light waltz was still very weak, and he couldn't even guarantee that he would be able to use it again in the future. Since he had an epiphany, he had to seize it and not let it slip away. His powerful divine light physique played a decisive role at this time. The competition still had to continue. At this time, the biggest winner of the 4th round was undoubtedly the light of Dawn Monster Hunters. A total of 12 people had entered the 5th round, and the light of Dawn Monster Hunters had already occupied 3 of them. Furthermore, there were still 3 of them who hadn't participated in the competition yet, including Kai, Chining, and Sima Xian. Sima Xian's competition finally came to an end. His opponent was a deputy temple master of the magic temple, who was a domain expert. If Sima Xian had the vigorous ball of light, he might have been able to put up a fight. Unfortunately, he didn't have a suitable weapon. Although his spiritual stove of purple godly lightning caused a lot of trouble for his opponent, he was still defeated in the end, and another person from the Light of Dawn team was eliminated. In the 8th round of the 4th round, the light of choice finally shone on Kai, and her opponent was a mage from the magic temple. With a flash of her figure, Kai had already floated out. The moment her toes touched the ground, her body had already moved into the competition arena. Speaking of which, in the first 3 rounds of the individual competition in the temple tournament, Kai's luck was much better than Long Haochen's. She almost didn't encounter any strong opponents. Even in the 3rd round, she encountered a relatively weak opponent, which she easily passed without using her domain. Therefore, in the tournament, even Sima Xian's reputation was greater than hers. When Sima Xian had just lost the competition, whether it was in the arena or the spectators outside, there was a lot of pity. His wild fighting style was really very attractive. Of course, Kai wasn't really inconspicuous. At least, the powerhouses who had seen her release the Tower of Eternity yesterday didn't think so. It was just that the people outside didn't see that scene. Kai, or his opponent, was an old mage. He wore a simple black robe, which formed a sharp contrast with his silver hair. His eyes were very special. They didn't have the slightest dim yellow color, but were especially clear, which formed a sharp contrast with the wrinkles on his face. Moreover, his eyes were actually purple, which was somewhat similar to many advanced demons. This old mage was called Mo Wu. Even within the magic temple, there were very few people who were familiar with him, let alone the other major temples. His title was the Elder of the Magic Temple. In the previous rounds, he had always defeated his opponents without revealing his strength. Up until the fourth round, the only impression that Kai had of him was that this Elder Mo Wu had the dark attribute. No one would look down on the members of the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters because of their young age. As soon as they entered the arena, Mo Wu's deep chanting sounded. Kai didn't hide herself. A pair of huge gray spiritual wings instantly spread open behind her. In the next moment, the gray spiritual wings turned white. With a strong flap, she almost instantly appeared in front of Mo Wu. In terms of instantaneous acceleration, even the long Haochin with his 6 wings couldn't compare to Kai. In the previous rounds, when Kai won, speed played a big role. This mage Mo Wu was obviously prepared. He kept chanting and drew a dark purple triangle in the air with his right hand. Just as Kai was about to reach him, his body suddenly disappeared. Kai was slightly surprised. Could dark mages teleport? One had to know that this competition didn't allow the use of any equipment. In the next moment, this mage Mo Wu appeared in another direction. One could see that there was an additional dark purple triangle spinning under his feet. What kind of skill was this? This was the first time Kai had encountered such a situation. It was obvious that this was a self-created skill. Of course, she couldn't let her opponent complete his magic. With a cold snort, her body flashed again. At the same time, she raised her right hand and a huge white scythe appeared in her grasp. She couldn't use the Grim Reaper scythe, so she could only imitate it. After all, this was her favorite weapon. The Grim Reaper scythe first slashed in the air, and a crack suddenly appeared in the air. The crack wasn't big, but the moment it appeared, all the elements in the great trial field, regardless of their attributes, swarmed towards it. The crack actually produced a huge suction force. Not only that, the Grim Reaper scythe in Kai's hand slashed at each of the 6, but the same crack appeared, and all the elements in the great trial field were stirred up, creating a state of spatial disorder. Although she didn't know how her opponent did it, it was impossible for dark magic to teleport. There had to be a hint of spatial magic involved. She stirred up the space so that her opponent couldn't teleport again. All of this happened very quickly. Mo Wu's expression changed slightly when he saw the milky white light that Kai had cast flicker in the air. In the next instant, Kai appeared in front of him again. The Grim Reaper scythe in her hand flashed and slashed diagonally at him. Before the blade of light reached him, an extremely sharp aura had already invaded him. Surprisingly, Mo Wu didn't retreat. Instead, he took a step forward and pointed at the air with his right hand. A small ball of purplish-black light stopped in the air, as if the air had become his drawing board and he had left a mark on it. Kai felt completely different from the spectators outside. Mo Wu's pointing in the air made his body seem illusory, as if countless Mo had appeared in front of her. The aura that had locked onto her opponent earlier also became illusory. With a flash of white light, that mass of purplish-black light disappeared. At this time, Mo Wu had already completed his spell. One after another, purplish-black beams of light fell from the sky. As if they had eyes, they instantly inserted themselves around Kai Er's body, forming a circular cage that trapped her inside. Dark prison cage, a powerful rank 9 dark attribute magic. Kai Er's scythe swept horizontally. When it came into contact with the dark prison cage, it actually passed through it as if it had not touched it at all. However, when she tried to rush out, she immediately felt a sharp pain all over her body. A huge amount of dark element seemed to be directly drilling into her body. Kai was shocked. However, she had always been calm and did not panic in the face of such a situation. The Grim Reaper's scythe disappeared, and she clasped her hands in front of her chest. She even closed her eyes at the same time. It was as if she was feeling something and looking for a flaw in the dark prison cage. Seeing that his dark prison cage was effective, Mo Wu couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. He kept chanting incantations, and at the same time, circles of purplish-black light spread from his feet. Very quickly, these halos became three-dimensional and pushed his body upwards. It gave people the feeling that he was standing on a huge altar. Mo Wu raised his right hand, and a purplish-black magic staff appeared in his grasp. Although it was condensed from spiritual power, at this moment he looked luxurious and dignified. The purplish-black light flowed down from the magic staff and turned into a gorgeous magic robe that covered his body. His entire aura instantly became stronger. A terrifying pressure began to appear around his body. A large, purplish-black cloud of light floated out from the altar that he had created. These purplish-black halos floated in the air, and there seemed to be a faint flash of lightning. Since when did the magic temple have such a strong person? This was clearly the ability of a domain. When the other 5 temple members saw this, they couldn't help but be shocked. Mo Wu's cultivation was much stronger than they had imagined. Not only was he able to trap Kai Er with a spell, but he had also displayed a domain. This domain seemed to be purely amplifying. His next spell would definitely be extremely terrifying. One after another, purplish-black runes began to float around the altar, and a gloomy chanting sound reverberated throughout the great trial grounds. One could see that within the great trial grounds, the ground had already unknowingly turned purplish-black, and at the same time, a mist began to undulate, transforming into one giant bubble after another. The crack that Kai had left in the air had already completely closed. Dark Nirvana, dark domination, come forth, Lord of Darkness. Along with the deep chant, purple lightning shot out from Mo Wu's eyes. A huge purple hexagram appeared in front of his altar, and a huge shadow emerged from the hexagram. It was a human about 5 meters tall, wearing dark purple armor from head to toe. A pair of curved horns extended to the back of his head, and his face was covered by a mask. In his right hand, he held a huge sword that emitted a purplish-black light. Just by appearing, he gave off an invisible sense of oppression. Even with the barrier separating them, he still gave off a feeling of suffocation. This dark mage is so powerful. Lin Xian couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice. This was clearly a powerful dark summoning spell, and the strength of the summoned Lord of Darkness was quite terrifying. To be able to produce such a strong pressure, it was comparable to the 4-headed chimera that Chan Hongba had fused with previously. No one had expected the magic temple to have such a trump card. It would be great if Boss fought him, Han Yu couldn't help but say. Mo Wu was a dark mage, and Long Haochen's divine light domain could perfectly restrain him, so he naturally wasn't afraid. However, could Kai Er do it? Among the light of dawn monster hunters, Long Haochen was undoubtedly the strongest, followed by Kai Er. If Kai Er lost the competition, it would be a huge blow to them. Don't worry, Kai Er can definitely do it. At some point, Long Haochen had already opened his eyes. When Kai Er went out to battle and encountered a huge threat, he immediately sensed it. Looking at the situation in the arena, it seemed that Kai Er was at a complete disadvantage. However, was that really the case? After the Lord of Darkness appeared, he didn't make any special sounds. In the void, he took a step forward and appeared in front of Kai Er, who was imprisoned in the dark prison cage. He raised the giant sword in his hand high above his head and slashed at Kai Er. After completing this summoning spell, Mo closed his eyes and sat cross-legged on his dark altar. This dark altar was his domain, and it could greatly increase the power of all the dark magic he cast. At the same time, it increased the speed of his mana recovery. Perhaps it wasn't too strong in a domain, because there were many restrictions, but once he gained the initiative, the power of this domain would be fully displayed. Facing the giant sword's downward slash, Kai Er's body suddenly disappeared. Yes, she disappeared without any warning. Mo almost instantly sensed that something was wrong. The dark purple triangle appeared again, and in the next instant his body disappeared from the altar. A trace of white light appeared on the dark altar, and the altar instantly shattered, turning into countless streams of dark purple air and disappearing. Kai Er appeared where Mo was previously floating there. Mo was shocked, because he didn't know how Kai Er escaped from the dark prison cage. The dark prison cage was a 9th grade confinement spell, and it seemed that Kai Er had been there the whole time without any movement. How could he have known how powerful Kai Er was after breaking through to the 9th step? In the instant the black prison cage appeared, she used the doppelganger technique, simultaneously using both doppelganger and invisibility. If it were someone else, the doppelganger wouldn't last long, and it would definitely be discovered by the sharp perception of the magician. Even the original body wouldn't be able to escape the lock of the dark prison cage. However, Kai Er was different. She was the reincarnation saint, and she had the power of purification. As the most talented assassin, if she couldn't escape the lock of the opponent, she wouldn't be worthy of being called the reincarnation saint. However, in order to maintain the stability of the doppelganger, she couldn't act rashly after escaping. Otherwise, the doppelganger would immediately disappear. Only when Mo summoned the King of Darkness to attack her doppelganger did Kai Er suddenly make a move. However, Mo's judgment was extremely accurate. The moment he was about to be hit by Kai Er, he used a skill similar to teleportation to escape again. Even so, his clothes were soaked in cold sweat. If he had been a step slower, Kai Er's attack would have landed on him, and the outcome of the battle would have been decided. The King of Darkness obviously felt that something was wrong. A dark purple light spurted out from his chest. It wasn't aimed at Kai Er, but at Mo who had teleported in front of him. With a flash of light, Mo actually disappeared in the dark purple light of the King of Darkness. It seemed to have the same effect as Chen Hongba. In this way, unless Kai Er defeated the King of Darkness, she wouldn't be able to attack Mo. This was also what Mo thought. For him, the best situation should be for the King of Darkness to attack Kai Er while he recovered his spiritual power in his altar domain. In this case, as long as he had enough time, he could even summon another King of Darkness. But now he couldn't. After merging with the King of Darkness, although he could command it, he couldn't recover his spiritual power at all, let alone use the altar domain. He could only hope that the King of Darkness could defeat Kai Er. Mo also had a certain degree of confidence in the ability of the King of Darkness. In any case, this King of Darkness had the strength equivalent to a Stage 2 rank 9. Yesterday, although Kai Er's Tower of Eternity had shocked the audience, it was, after all, a piece of equipment. It was not allowed to be used in the individual competition. Could an assassin defeat a heavily armored King of Darkness unarmed? He hit it. Kai Er revealed a sneer. Of course. She knew that this time, their biggest competitor was the Magic Temple. She would not show any mercy to the mages of the Magic Temple. The death scythe, formed by the light of purification, slowly lifted up. She didn't fly again, but instead ran towards the King of Darkness. The scythe of the god of death was dragged behind her, and Kai-Er's eyes also turned white. Her peerlessly beautiful face, elegant temperament, and that huge scythe formed a beautiful and bizarre scene. Although her opponent's armor was also dazzling, this scene made the majority of the spectators unable to help but place their faith in Kai-Er. After all, towards creatures of darkness, they already deeply detested them. Not to mention Kai-Er was so beautiful and so young. A purple light flashed in the eyes of the king of darkness. He stomped his right foot on the ground and rushed towards Kai-Er. Holding the huge, purplish-black sword with both hands, he made an upward, slashing motion. The most terrifying thing about the king of darkness was that he could use his dark spiritual power to an extremely condensed level. His spiritual power wasn't released externally, it was only attached to his weapon, but its explosive power was much stronger. Kai-Er didn't dodge, nor did she use any techniques. The scythe in her hand slashed downwards. White light rose from her body, and her aura reached its peak in an instant. Overlord Slash was a skill formed from the Overlord's Thorn. At this moment, when Kai-Er used it, her whole body was filled with an indescribably powerful and domineering aura. Ding! Amidst the crisp sound of collision, the death scythe in Kai-Er's hand showed signs of collapsing. After all, it wasn't the real death scythe. It was only condensed by spiritual power. In terms of attack and defense, it was far inferior to the death scythe, which was a divine weapon. However, the King of Darkness didn't have it easy either. When the two collided, the purplish-black aura on his body rose up, as if it was about to leave his body. At the same time, his movements became sluggish. Kai-Er didn't give in. She jumped up high and condensed another death scythe in her hand. A white light flashed in the air, and an ear-piercing, tearing sound appeared in the sky. With a loud bang, the scythe struck the opponent's heavy sword. The King of Darkness let out a low roar, and a purplish-black mist surged. Under his imposing aura, there seemed to be countless black shadows spreading from his body. All the purplish-black bubbles on the ground surged up and turned into countless purplish-black rays of light that intertwined in the air. This was the King of Darkness's domain. Although no one knew the name of this domain, there was no doubt that it was an area of effect domain. As it turned out, those black bubbles didn't belong to Mo Wu, but to this sovereign of darkness, a creature of the second rank of the 9th step, a creature of darkness that already had a domain. This Mo Wu's dark summoning technique was even more frightening than the summoners of the spiritual temple. However, an even more shocking scene followed. When Kai-Er's body reappeared, she was already 10 meters above the sovereign of darkness. The King of Darkness's domain had already erupted. This was an omnidirectional attack, and there was no space to dodge. Mo Wu was prepared to stop attacking as soon as Kai-Er couldn't hold on. However, what happened next was unforgettable. Floating in the air, Kai-Er put her palms together again. Pieces of pure white light turned into flower petals and sprinkled down. A strange scene appeared. When the purplish-black light from the King of Darkness's domain came into contact with the white light, it immediately turned into nothingness and dissipated. More and more white petals fell, while the dark purple light became less and less. It was as if a flower of purification had suddenly bloomed in the endless darkness, bringing hope to everyone. In that strange purification, all the darkness turned into nothingness and gradually revealed the taste of light. Li Jingji opened his mouth in surprise. He could more or less understand the rules of Long Haochen's God of Light domain. After all, it was pure light. However, the domain displayed by Kai-Er was beyond his understanding. This kind of aura, the body of the King of Darkness trembled slightly. Raising his head to look at Kai-Er in midair, he looked at the rapidly expanding domain of purification. His body suddenly swayed, and immediately afterwards he appeared at the edge of the great trial field. The heavy sword in his hand quickly slashed in the air, creating a dark purple hexagram. Taking a step forward, he was already standing in the center of the hexagram. The King of Darkness' body suddenly shook. In the next instant, Mo Wu's body was thrown out, and the King of Darkness directly disappeared in the purple hexagram. The King of Darkness's domain naturally dissipated after he left, leaving behind a confused Mo Wu. He couldn't understand why the King of Darkness left in such a hurry when he wasn't at a disadvantage. Could it be that the King of Darkness left his clothes hanging outside and it was going to rain? This strange thought flashed through Mo Wu's mind, and in the air only Kai, who was releasing her domain, calmly looked at him. I know that you specialize in dark magic as well as spatial magic. Perhaps your spatial magic can also allow you to teleport. However, you can try and see if your teleportation can succeed in my domain of purification. The white had already spread to Mo Wu. As soon as his body came into contact with Kai Er's domain, he immediately understood why the King of Darkness had fled. An indescribable pain appeared in the depths of his soul. At the same time, his body trembled violently. He said in horror, I admit defeat. Chapter 249. He had no choice but to admit defeat. The terrifying purification domain suppression on his darkness attribute wasn't inferior to the light attribute domain suppression. Not only was his spiritual power being purified, but his soul was also being purified. What was even more frightening was that the spiritual power being purified was his origin power. In other words, under the shroud of the purification domain, his cultivation would continue to drop. How could Mo Wu endure this? As for the King of Darkness's escape, there was only one reason. He was afraid. He was afraid. Perhaps he could still fight against Kai in terms of strength, but what would happen after that? Once his soul was purified by the domain of purification, he would never be able to return. The King of Darkness wasn't a fool. He knew that the relationship between him and Mo Wu wasn't a contract. Instead, it was a mysterious connection. Would he give up his life for this connection? That was obviously impossible. As the saying goes, it is better for your friend to die than for me to die. After feeling the terror of the purification domain, the King of Darkness instantly fled. Kai slowly descended from the sky. The purification domain turned back into petals and retracted. After glancing at Mo Wu, she flashed out of the great trial field. In fact, for the members of the Light of Dawn monster hunters, Kai was the one who weakened the most in this individual competition. Although she had the purification domain, her real combat power was still the Grim Reaper scythe that she had fused with since childhood. Without the real Grim Reaper scythe, she could not use the Grim Reaper's 7 absolutes at all. Moreover, once the battle started, the Grim Reaper scythe in her body would struggle to come out. Not only could Kai not borrow its strength, but she also had to suppress it. Therefore, in the individual competition, it would be good if Kai could use half of her strength. She could not use her terrifying, explosive power at all. This was the 4th person from the Light of Dawn monster hunters to pass the 4th round of the individual competition. They had already occupied 1/3 of the seats, and there was still one person who had not fought yet. When Chen-Ing entered the arena, she met the last participant from the Assassin Temple, who was also the only remaining assassin. She won by relying on her powerful summoning magic. At the end of the 4th round, the Light of Dawn led the group with a terrifying result of advancing to the 5th round with 5 participants. At this point in the individual competition, the rise of the Light of Dawn was unstoppable. Of the 10 participants, 2 were at the peak of the 8th rank, 8 were at the 9th rank, and 4 were at the domain realm. Long Haochen had even used his domain technique and evolution domain, defeating 2 temple masters and the number 1 expert of the Knights Templars. Many people already felt that this year's temple tournament would be recorded in the history books. They were still so young. If they were given enough time to grow, it would not be impossible for them to eliminate the demons. Although the 6 temples had their own internal politics and the Temple Alliance was relatively loose, But in the past 6,000 years of the Dark Ages, they had fought against the demon race for far too long, far too long. It was unknown how many experts of the 6 temples had shed their blood on the battlefield. The bright glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad had allowed them to see the true light of dawn. Many people had an indescribable feeling in their hearts. If one were to say what the bright glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad had given them, they would definitely say hope. In the 4th round, every winner would receive 8 points. After this round, the Knights Templars were left with 2 people. The Magic Temple had 3, the Soul Temple had 2, the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had 5, and the Assassin Temple and Warrior Temple had all been wiped out. The Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had advanced to the next round with 5 participants and obtained 40 points. In addition to the previous 56 points, they were at the top with 96 points. The Magic Temple was second with 89 points. The Knights Templars were third with 82 points. The Soul Temple was fourth with 58 points. The Assassin Temple was still at 34 points. And the Warrior Temple was still at 24 points. It was already noon. According to the normal schedule of the Temple Tournament, the winner of the individual competition would be decided today. Although there was a delay yesterday, the tournament still had to continue. The 5 participants from the Temple and the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had received the news early in the morning that no matter how late the tournament went, they had to finish the individual competition by the end of the day. The Temple Tournament had never lasted too long. It wasn't to test the participants' endurance, but more importantly, the demons. A large number of powerhouses from the 6 major temples had returned to the Holy City to participate in the tournament. What if the demons took advantage of this opportunity to launch a full-scale attack? Therefore, the Temple Tournament was said to be held once every 10 years, but the specific starting time was set at the last minute. This was to prevent the demons from grasping the pattern. Therefore, the tournament had to be compressed as much as possible so that the powerhouses from the major temple could return to the front lines as soon as possible after the tournament ended. This year, they had to make the best use of their time. After the Temple Tournament, there were a series of new policies and important matters that concerned the entire alliance that needed to be discussed. After the 4th round, the score was announced, and the 5th round of the tournament began immediately. There were a total of 6 matches in the 5th round. According to the previous pattern, although 5 members of the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had entered the 5th round, they shouldn't meet each other. In other words, this 5th round was equivalent to the praise of Light Monster Hunters fighting against the Night, Magic, and Ling Yaolon Temple at the same time. If they won this round, each person would get as many as 16 points. Therefore, although the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters were currently in the lead, this position wasn't stable and could change at any time. The first match was like Mars colliding with Earth. Chuning, as good luck, seemed to have run out. One light of choice fell on her, and the other went straight for the Magic Temple's Temple Master, Li Jingji. Long Haochen's expression changed slightly, and he exchanged glances with Channing, nodded at him lightly, stood up, and slowly walked into the arena. In today's competition, Li Jingji seemed exceptionally calm. Although the Light of Dawn had obtained an impressive result, he was like an ancient well, without the slightest ripple in his emotions. No one knew if he really didn't care or if he had other thoughts. Right now, among the 5 participating sacred halls, only Li Jingji was left as the leader of the sacred halls. The other 4 sacred hall masters had already been eliminated, and he had encountered Kai as soon as he came up. This raised the spirits of the spectators to an extremely high level. This Chen Inger also had a domain ability. Would the bright glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad be able to give everyone another pleasant surprise? With a smile on her face, Chen Inger walked into the arena and bowed to Li Jingji. No matter what, Li Jingji was still her elder. Li Jingji nodded slightly and made a gesture of invitation. With his status, facing a young person like Channing, he naturally wouldn't make the first move. Chen Inger directly sat cross-legged on the ground and then began to recite a spell. She didn't even take any protective measures. Looking at her, Li Jingji couldn't help but be slightly stunned. This little girl was really good. She clearly grasped the opportunity when he wasn't willing to make the first move. Even if she didn't make the first move, was there no other way? Li Jingji smiled slightly and actually began to recite a spell while standing there. The arena fell into a strange silence. Since the start of the temple tournament, this was the first time that the two mages started to recite a spell without probing each other. A faint aura spread out from within Li Jingji's body. Soon, it condensed behind him, surrounded by green light. It was actually an enlarged version of Li Jingji. He was chubby and looked a little silly and cute. So fast. Long Haochen, who was sitting on the side of the Knights Templars, could not help but be shocked. Li Jingji's spell was similar to the wind god's summoning spell. From the beginning to the end, it took less than 20 seconds. The power of this spell was definitely at the level of a forbidden spell. What kind of concept was it to cast a forbidden spell in 20 seconds? Moreover, it was done without the assistance of any equipment. At the same time, Li Jingji did not release his wind god's domain. Chuning did not seem to be affected by Li Jingji's spell at all. She continued to recite the spell, and the intonation became more and more difficult and lengthy. This time, Li Jingji's expression changed slightly, because he could not tell what spell Chuning was reciting. As a top-notch mage, Li Jingji did not want to make the first move, but he also did not want to be passive, so he immediately cast a forbidden spell in preparation. This way, no matter what kind of magical beast Chuning summoned, he was confident that he could destroy it with his own magic. Even if the magical beast Chuning summoned was slightly stronger, he could still use the wind god's domain to enhance his own magic. It was not that Li Jingji could not complete a few more spells at the same time, but he felt that it was completely unnecessary. Moreover, not releasing the spell after the chanting was completed would consume a lot of spiritual power. He did not expect Chuning to take such a long time to recite. This lady was also a level 9 powerhouse, so how strong would her summoning spell be if she needed such a long time to recite? Although Li Jingji had this thought, he still underestimated the time Chuning took to recite the spell. In the blink of an eye, 3 minutes had passed, and Chuning was still reciting. The spell had not been released. If he did not know that Chuning was a level 9 cultivator, Li Jingji would have thought that she was putting on an act. How could she take so long to recite? Girl, if you continue like this, I will have to take action. Li Jingji's faint voice sounded in the great trial field. This was the temple tournament. No matter how much he wanted to maintain his status, he could not continue to waste his spiritual power like this. Maintaining the forbidden spell consumed a lot of spiritual power during this period of time, and there were still competitions later on. If he consumed too much spiritual power, it would be very disadvantageous. Just as Li Jingji was speaking, Chuning suddenly opened her eyes, smiled sweetly at Li Jingji, and even replied, "Done!" As she spoke, Chuning slowly raised her hands, fingertips pointing outwards, palms facing upwards, making a movement similar to holding up the sky. Then the roar of 10,000 beasts burst out from her body like a tsunami. Not only was there sound, what was more terrifying was that there were countless magical beast shadows appearing behind Chuning at the same time. This is a domain, but does a domain need such a long chanting time? Li Jingji could tell at a glance that Chuning was currently displaying a powerful summoner's domain. Could it be the Beast King domain like her grandfather's? Although Chuning had also displayed a domain in the previous competitions, it was only for a single enhancement to her magical beast. At most, it was a double enhancement. This was the first time that she had displayed a domain in such a comprehensive manner. Just as Li Jingji was puzzled, his expression changed. Light gates lined up neatly in an arc behind Chuning. Seeing these light gates, the ones who were the most shocked were not the people from the other 5 major temples, but the people from the Soul Temple. Even Chun Hongba the temple master of the Soul Temple, was dumbfounded when he saw this scene. He never thought that his granddaughter could actually display such a spell. He was also puzzled when Chun-Ing chanted for such a long time. With his many years of experience in managing the Soul Temple, he did not remember any spell in the Soul Temple that required such a chant. Even summoning a Class 9 magical beast would not take so long. Otherwise, on the battlefield, 3 minutes was enough for the summoner to die 100 times. At this moment, Chen Hongbo was really shocked by his granddaughter. All the summoners were shocked as well. They had never thought that a summoner could actually have such extreme strength. Let's count. How many doors of light were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In any case, with just a glance, they couldn't count them all. All the light gates formed a huge semicircle, as though they were protecting Chun-Ing-er's body. In the roars of thousands of beasts, all the light gates opened at the same time, and magical beasts came out of the light gates one after another. There were a total of 36 light gates. As soon as the 36 light gates opened, 36 magical beasts came out immediately. Seeing these magical beasts, Li Jingji's expression became slightly better. They were only at the 8th step, not the 9th step. If this Chun-Ing could summon 36 magical beasts that were equivalent to the cultivation of a 9th step human expert, then it would be too terrifying. However, even so, Chen Oi's summoning spell still shocked everyone. What kind of concept was it to summon 36 Class 8 magical beasts at the same time? If it was on the battlefield, it could almost change the situation of an area in an instant. It turned out that this summoner was the most powerful among the Light of Dawn monster hunters. Whether Chen-Ing was the most powerful or not, there was a conclusion among the Light of Dawn monster hunters. However, one thing was for sure. She was a blessed like Long Haochen and Kai. In the past few years, even if her harvest was not as much as Long Haochen and Kai, it was definitely not lacking. Although the summoning spell in front of her exhausted all her spiritual power, what if she was wearing the Soul Saint garment? Would the chanting time take so long? Not to mention that it would exhaust all her spiritual power. Even Long Haochen was not fully aware of Chun-Ing-er's true strength. In a sense, the current Light of Dawn monster hunters already had 3 cores, including Chun-Ing-er. In the previous matches, Chen-Ing had always been holding back. At this time, facing Li Jingji, she finally gave it her all. After returning yesterday, the Light of Dawn monster hunters had a simple meeting. There was no doubt that they would definitely encounter Li Jingji in today's competition. How could they fight against him? Soon, they came to a conclusion. No matter who encountered Li Jingji, they had to go all out and exhaust his strength as much as possible. After all, even if Li Jingji was not as strong as Yang Haoyu, he should not be too far off. Long Haochen could only defeat Yang Haoyu because he allowed him to. In a one-on-one situation, Long Haochen was not confident that he could defeat Li Jingji. However, the Light of Dawn monster hunters were a team, and their overall strength was definitely stronger than an individual. Anyway, the individual competition would end today. In that case, they would have to take turns to wear him down. Previously, Zhang Fangfang had effectively exhausted Li Jingji's strength. But because of the many matches after that, Li Jingji's spiritual power should have basically recovered. However, for this match, Chen-Ing had already made up her mind. Even if she could not defeat Li Jingji, she would exhaust most of his strength. As soon as the match started, Chun-Ing-er's plan succeeded. She made full use of Li Jingji's importance to his identity and completed her largest summoning spell. The appearance of 36 Class 8 magical beasts in the great trial field at the same time was definitely enough to shock everyone. Although these magical beasts were of different races, they completely obeyed Chun-Ing-er's commands. As soon as they appeared, they pounced on Li Jingji frantically. Li Jingji snorted coldly. They were only Class 8 magical beasts, so he really did not put them in his eyes. No matter how many there were, it was not a qualitative change. With his cultivation, killing Class 8 magical beasts was really too easy. With a gesture of his hands, the huge green figure behind him had already floated out. It raised its hands in the air, and a green crescent blade appeared in each of its hands. Standing in front of Li Jingji, it was like an insurmountable barrier. However, in the next moment, Li Jingji's expression became ugly again. Chening let out a scream towards the sky. Following that, the phantom beasts that appeared in the air before suddenly solidified. These phantom beasts rushed towards the Class 8 magical beasts at an astonishing speed, constantly fusing into their bodies, and these Class 8 magical beasts also began to rapidly change. A huge black bear roared towards the sky, and its body suddenly doubled in size. All the fur on its body actually turned dark gold. In the midst of its roar, there was already a terrifying seismic wave blasting towards the wind god that Li Jingji had summoned. Advancement. Of course, what Chening used was not Chun Hongba's Beast King domain, but the Beast Deity domain. As the favored of the Beast Deity and the only spiritual maiden that had ever appeared in the human world, her current enhancement ability towards magical beasts was even greater than that of Yi Xiaolei back in Fantasy Paradise. Under the enhancement of the Beast King domain, these Class 8 magical beasts actually all evolved into Class 9 magical beasts. In the blink of an eye, 36 Class 8 magical beasts became 36 Class 9 magical beasts, and a terrifying suppressive aura surged towards Li Jingji. Miscalculation. Li Jingji immediately made a judgment in his heart, and a trace of regret appeared. He really shouldn't have let Chen Inger complete this magic. 36 9th rank magical beasts and 36 8th rank magical beasts. These were two completely different concepts. After completing the enhancement of the domain, Chen Inger sat there weakly, but she still said fiercely, "Little fellas, get rid of him." What a spectacular scene it was to have 36 Class 9 magical beasts pounce on an opponent at the same time. The gigantic wind god wielded a pair of crescent blades, and after blocking the attacks of 3 Class 9 magical beasts consecutively, it started to become unstable. Class 9 magical beasts were judged based on human cultivation, but according to the levels of magical beasts, these were all Class 10 magical beasts. Perhaps they were not as strong as the four-headed chimera and the holy unicorn, but Class 10 magical beasts were also at the peak of magical beasts. Simply put, Li Jingji felt as though he had been besieged by the entire Adamantine Knight group, and that was not a good feeling. Li Jingji didn't dare to be negligent, and immediately released his wind god domain. He didn't dare to let the 36 Class 9 magical beasts unleash their full combat power. If that was the case, even the Demon Emperor would find it very troublesome, let alone him. Hence, Li Jingji erupted. The intense situation erupted in an instant, turning into a terrifying hurricane that engulfed all 36 Class 9 magical beasts. Instantly, the attacks of the magical beasts deviated, and their speed became slower in the hurricane. This was not a simple domain. To restrain so many Class 9 magical beasts at the same time, it had to be a domain skill. For his own safety, and for the sake of victory, Li Jingji had no choice but to directly use his domain skill. The terrifying hurricane was emerald green in color, and wherever it passed, every magical beast swayed unsteadily. The sharp wind blades in the hurricane were frantically slicing at their bodies. If it was a Class 8 magical beast, its body would probably be smashed under such an attack. However, it was different for Class 9 magical beasts. Their defense was far stronger than that of Class 8 magical beasts, and they would not be a problem for a while. Chan Ing ignored the situation in front of her and just sat there quietly to recover her spiritual energy. In her arms, she was still holding Medul Piglet. Li Jingji used his domain skill to control these magical beasts, and the power of his wind god summoning began to show. With the amplification of the wind god domain, the speed and attack power of the wind god summoning, which was based on Li Jingji's body, was instantly increased. With a flash of green light, the Class 9 giant bear with astonishing defense was cut into pieces. However, it was also slapped by the giant bear, and it was pushed back 10 meters. However, with the support of the wind god domain, this level of attack was nothing. Li Jingji's expression did not improve just because a Class 9 magical beast was killed. Instead, it became more serious. The consumption of domain skill could only be described as terrifying. Even if his internal spiritual energy had exceeded 400,000, he could not use it for a long time. Right now, he only had one choice, and that was to take the opportunity to kill Qining. These magical beasts would then go out of control, and it would be much easier for him to take advantage of the situation. However, Qining could not be killed. This was the temple tournament, not a battle of life and death. Therefore, in a sense, Qining had made full use of the rules. Therefore, he could not attack Qining now. A summoner's body was fragile, and Li Jingji was really afraid that he would accidentally kill this genius girl. However, if he did not kill Qining, these magical beasts would not be in chaos. If they continued to attack, even if he could kill more than half of them, he would probably be exhausted to death. Moreover, the summoning spell had already been completed. Although the 36 light doors had closed and disappeared, these magical beasts would not return to where they came from unless Qining was willing. Only by killing all of them could this battle end. With an accurate judgment, Li Jingji did not hesitate anymore. He clasped his hands in front of him and made a gesture. 2 terrifying green lights shone from his eyes just like that. The crazy intent quickly climbed up Li Jingji's body. The spinning speed of the wind god's domain suddenly slowed down, and the wind god summon quickly returned to Li Jingji's side. It actually enveloped him before slowly shrinking and fusing into Li Jingji's body. Currently, Li Jingji's entire body was covered in a dazzling green light. With a flick of his right hand, a palm-sized wind blade silently flew out. The wind blade seemed rather unstable, with a clear green stream of air flowing on it. In the blink of an eye, it landed on a Class 9 magical beast. At this moment, the Class 9 magical beasts were affected by the wind god's domain and became even slower, as if they had sunk into a quagmire. However, what difference was a wind blade from tickling a Class 9 magical beast? However, in the next moment, Li Jingji allowed everyone to witness the power of his second domain technique. With a soft pew sound, the green wind blade easily entered the Class 9 magical beast's body. In just a second, the Class 9 magical beast had actually completely turned green. With a strange look in its eyes, it suddenly exploded. There was not even a splatter of blood or flesh. It turned into several gusts of wind and disappeared just like that. This was Qining-er's eyes widened. She had no idea how Li Jingji had done it at all. Just when she was shocked, Li Jingji flicked his hands several times, and the same wind blades flew out just like before. The result was the same. Wherever the wind blades passed by, not a single Class 9 magical beast could withstand it. They were all turned into gusts of wind in the blink of an eye, without leaving behind any remains. Wu Haoqin's eyes were filled with sternness. He had already gradually seen through the mysteries of Li Jingji's second domain technique. The true essence of wind. He had already grasped the true essence of wind. What was the true essence of wind? It was freedom. He had pushed the freedom of wind to the limit, creating a second domain technique. That's right. The name of Li Jingji's second domain technique was freedom. Over 30 Class 9 magical beasts disappeared in the wind of freedom. When the last magical beast disappeared, Li Jingji's body shook a little, but his eyes were still focused. A powerful roar was heard. Medel, who was in Qining-er's arms, suddenly leaped up. His body instantly enlarged in the air. When he landed on the ground, many people could not help but look at Chen Hongba. That was because the magical beast that Medel had transformed into was Chen Hongba's natal magical beast, the four-headed chimera. Roar. The 4 breaths blasted toward the wind god's domain. After all, McDull was just a transformation, and there was still a gap between him and the real four-headed chimera. Therefore, the four breaths couldn't be fused and could only fight separately. Even so, it was still an attack of a Class 9 magical beast. However, the domain of wind in its domain technique state was indeed powerful. When the four breaths entered it, they were immediately engulfed by the hurricane. First, they slowed down, then they were disintegrated by the hurricane and disappeared. Li Jingji raised his hand, and another wind blade formed in his palm. He calmly said to Chenning, if you don't wish for your natal magical beast to die, then admit defeat. Looking at Li Jingji's cold gaze, Chenning slowly stood up and snorted. If it wasn't for the fact that you can't use your equipment, you might not be able to defeat me. Li Jingji smiled indifferently, but did not say anything. He was an elder. He could not tell Chenning that his equipment was not weaker than hers. The green wind blade in his hand flew straight towards McDull. Chenning was shocked. Previously, so many Class 9 magical beasts had died under this seemingly ordinary wind blade. She really did not dare to gamble with McDull's life. She hurriedly shouted, "I lost." The wind blade dissipated in the air. Li Jingji instantly retracted his domain. His face was obviously a little pale, but his footsteps were still steady. Chenning wearily returned to her companion's side. She pouted, clearly not satisfied with her results. "Boss, if I had used my elite troops, would I have a higher chance of winning?" Chenning asked Long Houchen. Long Houchen smiled and said, "Don't be unhappy. Palace Master Li's cultivation is indeed very strong. You've already done very well." Although he did not know the true extent of Li Jingji's exhaustion, using his domain in conjunction with 2 domain skills was definitely not a small consumption. At the very least, it would be impossible for Li Jingji to recover to his peak condition before the next round. Another member of the Light of Dawn monster hunters was eliminated. However, no one thought that Chenning had lost due to her performance. Those were 36 Class 9 magical beasts. It was more than enough to deal with the demons and the Emperor's Legion. Summoners who had cultivated to such a level could no longer simply be described as peak. The light flashed again. This time, it landed on Lin Exan. His opponent was a knight. Although the strongest members of the Knights Templars, Yang Haoyu and Long Tianyin, had been eliminated, the 2 of them still entered the 5th round. This showed how powerful these 2 knights were. Lin Exan was about to face a Class 9 Holy Knight with a domain. As soon as he entered the arena, Lin Yu's expression immediately became solemn. He knew that after the start of the temple tournament, the biggest test he had to face was here. Whether he could defeat his opponent or not, he must go all out to weaken his opponent's strength, even if his opponent was from the Knights Templars. However, among the 6 people who advanced to this round, it was very likely that 3 of them could advance. Therefore, weakening his opponent's strength now was equivalent to laying a good foundation for his companions in the next battle. Of course, it would be best if he could defeat his opponent. The Holy Knight was very old. His hair and beard were all white, and he looked at least as old as Long Tianyin. Facing Lin Exan, he did not summon his mount immediately. Instead, he raised his left hand, and a bright golden light shield appeared in his hand. Ling Gang had condensed a shield. This holy paladin was a guardian knight, and he seemed to have a lukewarm appearance. Facing this opponent, Lin Exan suddenly felt a little strange, because he was surprised to find that after so many rounds of the temple tournament, this holy paladin should have gone through a lot of difficulties to reach this stage. Yet he didn't leave any impression on Lin Exan. Despite being so low-key he had made it this far. What did this mean? The Guardian Knight was not good at one-on-one battles. This was the foundation of Knights Templars. Previously they had Yang Haoyu. Now they had this quiet, low-key and powerful Guardian Knight. For all these years, Knights Templars had been the #1 temple in the Alliance. Perhaps even without the appearance of the light of dawn monster hunters, it would be very difficult for the magic temple to completely overwhelm Knights Templars. This was even under the situation where only one of the 3 Knights of the Seal had come. In the past few years, the magic temple could be said to have been in the limelight, especially after the Holy War. Due to the fact that they had fewer losses on the battlefield, the magic temple's limelight had been completely overshadowed by Knights Templars. However, when it came to the temple tournament, which determined the ranking of the 6 temples, the foundation of Knights Templars was fully revealed. If not for the light of dawn monster hunters, there was an 80% chance that Knights Templars would still be in the lead. A blue light flashed in Lin Xian's eyes, and a pair of huge fire wings spread out behind him. His spiritual wings were very different from ordinary magicians. First of all, they were big. The size of the spiritual wings was directly related to the strength of the magician, other than Long Hao-Chen's special multiple wings. Generally speaking, the bigger the spiritual wings, the stronger the cultivation. However, Lin Xian had just broken through to level 9 not long ago, but the size of his spiritual wings could even be compared to the wings of wind of Li Jingji, the master of the magic temple. When the huge wings were spread out, they were at least 10 meters wide. When they spread out behind him, it was as if 2 walls of fire had risen. Furthermore, the flame that shone on Lin Xian's spiritual wings was the blue color of the heart of flame. As his cultivation continued to increase, after breaking through to level 9, the blue color of the heart of flame had an intoxicating sense of beauty. Along with the rhythm of the spiritual wings, the depth of the blue color changed continuously. It was as moving as facing the clearest sea at the seaside. Lin Xian put his hands together in front of him, and his eyes were shining. He raised his right hand, and a fire blade launched a probing attack towards the Holy Knight. Bang! The Holy Knight stood motionless on the spot as the blue flames circled around him. The heart of flame flowed through his shield, but it did not touch his body at all. It also could not penetrate the shield formed by the Lingang. This first attack was just the prelude to a full-blown attack. As a fire magician, the strongest point was the explosive power of the attack. It could be said that this match was a strong spear against a strong shield. Without hesitation, Lin Xian launched an all-out attack. His hands moved quickly, and streaks of blue fire blades flew towards the Holy Knight like blue lightning. Chapter 250. The Holy Knight took half a step forward with his left foot and made a small bow. No matter how Lin Xian attacked, the shield condensed by the Lingang in his hand blocked the flames of the Heart of Flame. Lin Xian's current flames of the Heart of Flame were at the level of the Lingang, but they didn't cause any damage to him. This meant that the Holy Knight must have a unique defense. It could be seen that there was an inconspicuous golden halo under the feet of the Holy Knight. The halo only moved slightly within a diameter of 5 meters around his body. Every time the golden halo approached his feet, its color would change slightly. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't notice it. It was a strange rainbow gold, a combination of 7 colors and gold. Domain. This was the domain that the Holy Knight possessed. His domain was so inconspicuous that after so many battles, there were not many people who really remembered him, even though there were people who said that he had a domain. If one had to use the simplest sentence to describe the Holy Knight, it would be as steady as a mountain. No matter how powerful your attack was, I will defend, unmoving like a mountain. Lin Xian didn't know what the purpose of his opponent's domain was, but his powerful and invasive flames of the Heart of Flame couldn't penetrate his opponent's shield at all. He also tried to use the flames of the Heart of Flame to attack, but his opponent's shield could cast a shield wall. Lin Xian's attack was very beautiful. The blue light danced in the sky and focused on the target, as if magic cannons were shooting at the same target. The Lingang consumed a lot of spiritual power. The biggest feature of Lingang's magic was that it was fast and violent, but compared to a forbidden spell, there was still a certain gap. It was easy to catch his opponent off guard, but if his attack encountered an opponent with a strong defense like the one in front of him, it would be very difficult. Although Lin Xian didn't know the exact speed of his opponent's spiritual power consumption, he could tell from his opponent's domain that his spiritual power cultivation was more than 200,000. If this continued, it would only be more disadvantageous for him. What should I do? Lin Xian's heart moved, and he suddenly stopped his attacks. Without the impact of the heart's flame, the holy knight felt his body lighten. On the other side, Lin Xian's body was surrounded by blue flames. It was obvious that he was trying his best to recover the spiritual power he had consumed. Battlefield recovery? The holy knight didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Does this brat really think that I don't have any attack power? No matter what, I'm still a grade 9 knight. The holy knight raised his hand and chanted in a low voice. A light spell gradually took shape. However, the guardian knight was a guardian knight after all. When he cast an attack skill, his speed couldn't be compared to the punishment knight. As the holy knight chanted, a light of judgment gradually took shape. Suddenly, a blue light flew over and bombarded his shield. Not only that, but another blue light drew an arc from behind and attacked the holy knight's back. Although it seemed that it wasn't difficult for the holy knight to resist, in fact, the magic attack power of Lin Xian's Lingang was quite terrifying. It wasn't that easy to resist, and he didn't dare to let Lin Xian's Lingang hit him. In desperation, the holy knight could only stop the light of judgment and protect his body with a shield wall. Seeing this scene, Lin Xian couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. Everyone had their own strengths, and at the same time, they naturally had their own weaknesses. The holy knight's defense was definitely strong, even stronger than Long Haochen's when he didn't cast the light god domain. However, his attack power was his weakness. With this understanding, Lin Xian also came up with a countermeasure. The attacks that had been like a torrential storm slowed down, and every second or so, he would release a flame of the heart of flames. His goal was very simple. He wanted his opponent to maintain the Lingang as a shield, but he didn't want his attack speed to be too fast. In this way, his own consumption would be greatly reduced. With a pair of huge fire wings, his spiritual power recovery speed would naturally be faster than his opponent's. This turned from an offensive and defensive battle into a battle of attrition. The holy knight's domain was called Good Domain, which was researched by him. This holy knight had a peaceful nature and was best at defense. Therefore, his training direction had always been focused on defense. He used to be a demon hunter, but he wasn't the leader of a team. Although he was strong enough, his character was too gentle. He didn't have many attacking methods, and he wasn't willing to study attacks. In the first few matches of the temple tournament, his opponents were either far weaker than him, or he had exhausted his spiritual power and admitted defeat. The biggest feature of his good domain was that it could strengthen the Lingang and greatly reduce the consumption of the Lingang, so that the Lingang's strongest defense could reach the level of a domain skill. Within the Knights Templars, this holy knight had the title of the strongest shield. He had an epic shield. In the Holy War, he had fought many times against the undead demon gods Samakina and the Bear Veil Far. With a strong defense, these two demon gods couldn't do anything to him. He had made great contributions to the Knights Templars in the Holy War. Coupled with his gentle personality, he was very popular among the Knights Templars. He was on equal footing with several Knights of the Seal. Seeing that Lin Xian was using such a shameless method to deal with him, the Holy Knight couldn't help but laugh. However, Lin Xian's cultivation was really not enough to defeat him. The reason why he didn't summon his mount was because he was afraid that his mount wouldn't be able to resist Lin Xian's attack. After all, the Lingang formed under the high temperature of the flame of the heart had terrifying attack power. Holding the shield, the Holy Knight began to charge at Lin Xian. His speed didn't seem fast, but it was extremely steady. As soon as he moved, Lin Xian moved as well, trying to increase the distance between them. However, to Lin Xian's surprise, the Holy Knight kept changing his direction as he moved forward. always facing Lin Xan. Soon, the distance between the two was reduced to 100 meters. At this time, the Holy Knight suddenly stopped. The shield in his hand moved a little, revealing his face. He smiled gently at Lin Xan. In the next moment, a white light shot out like lightning, falling on Lin Xan's body in an instant. Lin Xan almost cursed out loud. Saint's spiritual stove, no matter how many times he calculated. He didn't expect that this old man would actually have such a great killing weapon like the Saint's spiritual stove. Pulling and pulling, these two great abilities simultaneously worked on Lin Xan's body. The Saint's spiritual stove had obviously been cultivated to the strongest degree by this Holy Knight. With his formidable defensive power, how could he not have the Saint's spiritual stove? Only with the Saint's spiritual stove, paired with his Lingang, would he be the strongest defender on the battlefield. Lin Xan's cultivation was inferior to the Holy Knight. He could only watch as he was slowly pulled over. Even if the Holy Knight wasn't good at close combat, in a direct confrontation, he was still not someone a magician could contend against. The Saint's spiritual stove's goal was naturally not to pull him over and defeat him, but to force him to attack with all his strength. This was also the reason why the Holy Knight revealed a smile to Lin Xan. Fight! At this point in the match, Lin Xan knew that it was almost impossible for him to win. At this moment, he had a strange feeling in his heart. He had always felt that his attack power was already quite strong. As a fire magician, apart from his own high explosive power, he also had the powerful amplification of the flame of the heart. However, he now understood that in the face of a true powerhouse, his attack power was still not enough. Apart from diligently cultivating his domain, it seemed that he had to put more effort into his magic. In the air, Lin Xan's body, which was constantly being pulled and pulled, suddenly paused. A resonant phoenix cry resounded from his chest. Immediately afterwards, Lin Xan's body disappeared. His huge pair of blue flame spirit wings enlarged a bit. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a huge blue flame phoenix in the sky, directly pouncing towards the Holy Knight. The Holy Knight's heart shivered. He was shocked to find that the blazing heat was not only external, but also in the depths of his heart when the blue flame phoenix appeared. Such a strong flame. There was no time to think. He activated his astral domain to the maximum. Bow step, shield wall, divine block. Just as the blue fire phoenix was about to collide with the shield wall, the huge phoenix suddenly shrank to almost half its original size. The flames of the heart's flame that had been floating around its body all retracted, making it no longer look like a body of energy, but more like a physical body. Boom! The blue flame phoenix finally collided with the shield wall. A terrifying scene appeared. In the instant of impact, the Holy Knight's shield wall turned completely blue, the exact same blue as the flame of the heart. Amidst the violent explosion, the Holy Knight's body was pushed back just like that, horizontally across the ground. Boom, boom, boom. The thunderous explosions were deafening. With every explosion, the Holy Knight's shield wall would be pushed back even faster. When the 9th explosion sounded, he had already been forced to the edge of the arena with his back against the protective shield. The shield wall was formed by Lingang. Under the effect of the astral domain, it had an extremely strong defense. However, if one looked closely, they would discover that the shield wall was actually dripping with liquid. That liquid was clearly spiritual energy, and the color of the dripping liquid was also blue. One could clearly see that the shield wall, under the amplification of the domain, was actually becoming thinner and thinner. It was slightly transparent, and one could even see the outline of the Holy Knight. As a non-domain realm master, he was actually able to use his own attacks to force a domain realm master to such an extent. This was enough for Lin Xan to be proud. The offensive power of his blue flame phoenix spiritual stove had already shocked the entire arena. The blue light retracted and the blue flame phoenix floated in the air. Compared to when it first appeared, it was clearly much weaker. Compared to when it first appeared, The blue flame on its body had already become slightly transparent, as though it could dissipate at any time. However, at that moment, the blue flame phoenix opened its mouth. Accompanied by a loud phoenix cry, 3 rays of green light turned into 3 thin lines and flew towards the shield wall in a straight line. Poof! The first green needle hit the shield wall. The thinner shield wall instantly rippled and became even more transparent. However, the green needle also dissipated after that. The second needle pierced through the shield wall, but the shield wall finally couldn't take it anymore. With a poof sound, a small hole appeared on the shield wall. However, when the shield wall broke, it also shattered the second needle. However, the third needle followed right after and instantly disappeared into the shield wall. With a groan, the Holy Knight staggered to the side and the shield wall also disappeared. With a flash of blue light, Lin Xian landed on the ground. He half-squatted with his left hand on the ground to support his body. His dark green hair looked a little messy. His body was trembling slightly, and his face was as pale as a sheet of paper. Ever since his cultivation reached level 9, this was the first time he had pushed the blue flame phoenix spiritual stove to its strongest level. The last 3 rays of green light were undoubtedly his trump card, the Hellfire Needle. This attack was a combination of the dark flame and his own flame of heart. It had an extremely strong penetrating power. The blue flame phoenix spiritual stove had exhausted the Lingang's shield wall as much as possible, and this last attack was the key to his victory. He couldn't let it go on like this. He could only use his strongest attack to decide the victory. Whether he won or lost, at least Lin Xian had exerted his full strength. The Holy Knight's face was not much better than Lin Xian's. On his right chest, a small cluster of cyan and blue flame was dancing. He was covering his right chest with his left hand, and his whole body was shining with golden light. However, the cyan flame was burning stubbornly there, and the flame was seeping out from the gaps between his fingers. The Holy Knight looked like he was in great pain. Lin Xian gasped for breath and struggled to raise his head to observe the Holy Knight's expression. Of course, he knew how powerful his dual fire combination was. It was not easy to extinguish the flame. Even if the Holy Knight succeeded in the end, he was afraid that his cultivation would fall to the edge of collapse, and he would not be able to continue the next match. "I admit defeat, young man." "Stop your magic," the Holy Knight said with a painful expression. Lin Xian was overjoyed to admit defeat. Although it was painful to bear the backfire of the spiritual stove of Blue Fire Phoenix, he did not expect to win the match. He raised his right hand and released his fire crystal staff, using it as a crutch. He walked to the Holy Knight's side and pressed his right hand on the old man's chest, sucking out the Hellfire Needle along with the dual fire combination. When he sucked out the flames, Lin Xian was slightly taken aback, because he discovered that the true injury suffered by the Holy Knight wasn't as great as he had imagined. Although his chest was scorched black, in reality, the power of the Hellfire Needle hadn't truly penetrated his body. The Holy Knight winked at him, and then staggered to the rest area. In an instant, Lin Xian understood that the opponent was going easy on him. The Lingang's body had clearly blocked the attack of the Hellfire Needle at the last moment with his Big Dipper domain, but he deliberately pretended to be weak and gave the victory to Lin Xian. When Lin Xian walked back to the rest area with the support of the fire crystal staff, he nodded slightly to the Holy Knight, who had already returned to his position, with a look of admiration in his eyes. The old knight smiled slightly, then closed his eyes to recover his spiritual power. Lin Xian returned to his position and sat down, his eyes subconsciously looking at Long Haochen. Long Haochen also smiled slightly, but did not say anything. He just signaled him to quickly recover his spiritual power, because there was still the next match. However, it was obvious that even if Lin Xian could suppress the backlash of the Blue Fire Phoenix spiritual stove, he was afraid that he would not be able to display the power of the spiritual stove in the next match. In the individual competition of the temple tournament, the Light of Dawn monster hunters did not have good luck. However, they had the full support of the Knights Templars in the dark. Among them, the two most important matches were the one between Long Haochin and Yang Haoyu, as well as the one just now. The strongest knight and the strongest shield gave way to each other, paving the way for them in the following matches. If Yang Haoyu really went all out, Long Haochin would definitely lose. As the leader of the Light of Dawn monster hunters, if Long Haochin lost the match, it would be a huge blow to the entire Light of Dawn monster hunters. It would also greatly affect his plan. Yang Haoyu's concession not only allowed Long Haochin to understand many skills related to domains, but it also boosted his reputation. Now, it was already the 5th round of the tournament, and there were only 12 contestants left. It could be said that every additional contestant from the Light of Dawn could affect their final ranking. The strongest shield, the Holy Knight, cleverly gave the victory to Lin Xan. Not only did he give the Light of Dawn monster hunters a large number of points, but he also gave them a place in the top 6. Although Chunning had lost the match, she had greatly depleted Li Jingji's strength. Lin Xan had advanced to the next round, and the Light of Dawn monster hunters still had 3 domain masters who had yet to appear. It could be said that the rest of the tournament was bright. The light of choice flashed again. This time, it chose the Bloody Goddess of War from the Light of Dawn monster hunters. Coincidentally, Wang Yuanyuan's opponent was a level 9 space magic god from the Magic Temple. He was also a domain master. Wang Yuanyuan's eyes flashed as she slowly walked into the arena. In the previous matches, although her opponents were not particularly strong, they were all above average contestants. It could be said that Wang Yuanyuan had overcome all the obstacles and finally reached this point. Her expression was very calm, but her eyes were very focused. Looking at the old magician in the distance, she gave a simple warrior's salute. The old magician returned the salute. Entering the 5th round, every match was extremely important. In the Magic Temple, Li Jingji had already advanced to the 6th round. If one more person could advance, at least the Magic Temple would be able to suppress the Knights Templars. If all 3 from the Magic Temple could advance, then it would be even more advantageous for them. The chanting of a spell sounded. The old magician raised his right hand and pointed at Wang Yuanyuan. Instantly, a ball of silver light flew straight in the direction of Wang Yuanyuan. At the same time, a slight distortion appeared in the air, and the old magician's figure disappeared into thin air. He really didn't underestimate Wang Yuanyuan. He used his domain right from the start because he had already observed Wang Yuanyuan's strength. He knew that this young lady was also a domain realm master. Naturally, he had to make the first move to gain the upper hand. The distorted air glowed with a faint silver light as it rapidly spread throughout the training field. The space element was full of uncertainty, and any perception within this domain would be greatly affected. Wang Yuanyuan stood there without moving. A layer of blood-red light began to spread from her feet. This was the blood domain. The blood domain spread, but it only maintained a diameter of 3 meters around Wang Yuanyuan's body. The blood light lingering around her body vividly displayed her title as the Bloody Goddess of War. The old magician's deep chanting continued, but it seemed to be echoing in all directions. Through the constant refraction of the blood domain, it was impossible for Wang Yuanyuan to discern his true location. The distorted space domain began to change. Rays of silver light began to appear, and cracks began to appear in the air. These black cracks were like a greedy mouth, ready to devour Wang Yuanyuan's body at any time. The number of cracks began to increase, and the distortion in the air became more and more violent. It was as if the space within the training field was being torn apart by the terrifying power of the space domain and could be shattered at any time. From the looks of it, Wang Yuanyuan was in an absolutely passive position. What was even more puzzling was that up until now, she still hadn't taken any action and was only releasing her own blood domain. However, no one noticed that the eyes of Wang Yuanyuan hidden within her blood domain were not red like before, but silver that belonged to the space attribute. In the individual competition of the temple, the most eye-catching thing about her was this strange blood domain. But don't forget, she was a warrior with the space attribute. Gentle spiritual energy flowed in the air, and Long Houchin's eyes revealed a trace of soul-stirring brilliance as he stared at the field. Wang Yuanyuan didn't take action at the start, but Long Houchin had already guessed what she was going to do. She would only make one attack, and she only had one chance. If she succeeded, she would win. If not, she would lose. Although the members of the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters could be said to be talented and extremely lucky to have reached the 9th level at such a young age, even reaching the domain level, what they lacked was the experience of a strong master. Their speed of improvement was too fast, and many of them had already reached the 9th level without experiencing a battle of the 8th level. Compared to the traditional domain-level masters of the 6 great temples, their strength was definitely lacking. For example, Lin Xian was clearly at a disadvantage when compared to the strongest shield knight. Now that it was Wang Yuanyuan's turn, her opponent was definitely not easy to deal with. If they fought head-on, the possibility of Wang Yuanyuan winning was actually not high. No one knew that among the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters, only Long Houchin and Kair had reached the 2nd level of the 9th level and had a domain level. Although Chen Inger and Wang Yuanyuan also had their own domain level, in reality, they were only at the 1st level of the 9th level. Their domain level was the result of 4 years of deep meditation. This was already a miracle, but behind this miracle, the lack of cultivation was also obvious. Otherwise, Chen Inger might not lose to Li Jingji. At least, she would bring Li Zhengji more trouble. The temple tournament did not allow the use of any equipment, so the disadvantage of the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters was naturally revealed. Therefore, Wang Yuanyuan took a different approach from the start and chose a different way of fighting. She stood there without moving, but in fact her mind and heart were always fighting. She was looking for her opponent's flaws and winning with one strike. The powerful space domain began to compress Wang Yuanyuan's living space. The space cracks in the domain were increasing. Looking from outside the protective shield, there were at least tens of thousands of space cracks in the grand trial field. It seemed like anything would be crushed in an instant. What should she do? What would Wang Yuanyuan choose? Many people had the same question in their minds. Finally, the first space crack came into contact with Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain. There was a hissing sound, like ice water coming into contact with a red-hot iron. Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain surged violently, and the space crack immediately disappeared. However, if one looked closely, they would find that the space crack had also forcibly torn away a trace of blood energy from her blood domain. This was just the beginning. Following the collision of the first space crack, more space cracks attacked Wang Yuanyuan. The hissing sound continued, and the space cracks would quickly disappear after coming into contact with the blood domain. However, it could also be seen that Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain was fluctuating violently, and its power was decreasing. The other party had a combination of magic and domain, while she only had a passive domain defense. In comparison, the difference in strength was obvious. The two domains continued to collide. At this time, among the spectators, many people were already shaking their heads. Even Li Jingji had a trace of a smile on his face. He muttered to himself, "Is this little girl looking for an opening? How could she find one? Old Yu's domain is said to be ever-changing, and there is no pattern to it. If this little girl wants to use the explosive power of her domain to launch a surprise attack, she will only fall deeper and deeper." Thinking that there would be another expert from the magic temple in the final 6, Li Jingji couldn't help but be in a good mood. His spiritual power was also rapidly recovering. If the 5th round was delayed for a bit longer, he might really be able to recover all his spiritual power in the next round. However, because he had used 2 domain techniques before, his vitality had been exhausted. Therefore, it was a bit difficult for him to recover to his peak state. As time passed, Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain was indeed very strong. Under the attack of the opponent's space domain and magic, it still stubbornly held on. At least thousands of space cracks had disappeared under her blood domain. Kai sighed softly and said, "I'm afraid that Yuan can't find the opponent's opening. This magician is very careful. Look, when he attacks with his domain, he constantly changes his attack pattern. Sometimes it's a single attack, and sometimes it's a group attack. Moreover, the density of the space cracks is increasing. If Yuan attacks, it is very likely that she will fall deeper. This old magician is too cunning." As soon as he discovered Yuan's thoughts, he immediately responded, "If this continues, Yuan won't be able to hold on for long." Long Haochen patted Kai's hand and said, "Believe in her. Not only is Yuan persistent, she's also very smart. Among us, her talent is actually the lowest, but her achievements are still extraordinary. She has her own domain, even though she's not even at the second level of the 9th rank. This is all because of her intelligence and comprehension." At this point, Long Haochen couldn't help but think of his former teacher, Knight Azura. He hadn't seen his teacher for many years. He didn't know where the Knights Templars had sent him. Long Haochen had asked his grandfather before, but Long Tianyin had kept it a secret. He only told him that Knight Azura was carrying out a very important mission. So, Long Haochen never had the chance to thank his teacher. In the arena, Wang Yuanyuan's blood domain had gradually shrunk from its original diameter of 3 meters to 1 meter. It was barely enough to protect her body. "Little girl, just admit defeat. This old man doesn't want to hurt you." The old magician's voice came from all directions. His attack also slowed down a little. This was the Grand Temple Tournament. The oppression of the domain was very dangerous. One wrong move and Wang Yuanyuan's life would be at risk. However, at the moment when the opponent's domain slowed down, Wang Yuanyuan finally moved. Her speed was too fast. All the spectators could see was a flash of bloodlight. She actually went straight into a spatial crack. The audience suddenly cried out in surprise. It should be known that these spatial cracks were created by spatial mages. They were not used for teleportation. Not only were they extremely unstable, they could collapse at any time. Spatial cracks had extremely powerful cutting and devouring abilities. Sucking people in was one of their powers. Jumping into one of them was no different from suicide. Who would have thought that Wang Yuanyuan would make such a choice? This girl was too unyielding. Could it be that she wanted to use her life in exchange for a loss in the Magic Temple Tournament? After all, according to the rules of the Grand Temple Tournament, if you kill your opponent in the tournament, you will immediately be eliminated. Even Li Jingji had a stunned look on his face when he saw this scene. However, in the next moment, everyone knew that they were wrong. With a flash of bloodlight, Wang Yuanyuan appeared in another position in the arena. At this moment, the numerous spatial cracks also became chaotic. Because the entire arena was filled with spatial cracks, when Wang Yuanyuan disappeared and reappeared, they could only vaguely see a red light flashing in the arena. No one could see what was happening inside. The spatial cracks began to disappear one by one, gradually revealing the situation in the center of the arena. What made everyone gasp was that Wang Yuanyuan was standing there quietly. Her palm was pressed on the top of the old magician's head. The old magician did not cast any more magic. He only looked at Wang Yuanyuan with a puzzled expression. "How did you do it?" The old magician was full of doubt as he asked, "In my domain with so many cracks in space, it's impossible for you to use your teleportation ability. I know you have a spiritual stove that can teleport. I've already considered all of this. I don't understand how you were able to pass through the cracks in space and finally appear in front of me. My domain and magic have no rules at all." Wang Yuanyuan said faintly, "No ability can be completely flawless. Because you used your domain to amplify the spatial cracks, you were able to make so many spatial cracks appear at the same time. That's right. There's no pattern between these spatial cracks. However, you've forgotten that they are in the same domain after all. This is their common characteristic. Since they are in the same domain, they will be connected to each other. In an instant, a spatial passageway will appear like a spider's web. What I did was to calculate and determine a spatial passageway that would lead me to your side. That's enough. Wang Yuanyuan's words seemed very simple, but the old magician's expression greatly changed. How is this possible? How much calculation is required? Moreover, if there is even the slightest mistake, you will be torn to shreds by the spatial fluctuations or thrown into the endless void. Wang Yuanyuan faintly said, "No, I won't." "That's right, my spiritual stove can't be used in your domain. But I can use my own domain to protect my original position. This is why I didn't move. Otherwise, I would be able to support my spiritual stove for a longer period of time. I didn't move because I wanted to maintain the spiritual stove's position. Even if I can't successfully pass through your spatial cracks, once I encounter danger, I can use the spiritual stove's position to return to my previous position. Didn't you notice that when I teleported, the blood fog on the other side also persisted for a period of time until I arrived next to you? Although it only persisted for a second, it was enough for me to make a judgment. Therefore, even if I make a mistake in my calculations, I will only fail and not die." The old magician stared blankly at Wang Yuanyuan for a long time without saying a word. Wang Yuanyuan withdrew her hand and once again gave him a warrior's salute before turning around to leave. "Wait a minute." The old magician suddenly called out to Wang Yuanyuan. Wang Yuanyuan turned around to look at him and said, "Do you still have something to say?" The old magician solemnly said, "I lost, and I accept my loss wholeheartedly, although you won in wisdom. But in this world, there are very few people who are as wise and calm as you. In the future, the warrior temple will surely respect you." As he said this, the old magician solemnly bowed to Wang Yuanyuan before turning around to leave with a smile. When Wang Yuanyuan walked out of the training field, she was greeted by a warm hug from Chen. "You won, you won. Yuan, you're the best." Chen Ying excitedly hugged Wang Yuanyuan. However, Wang Yuanyuan's body clearly swayed a bit. Closing her eyes, she weakly said, "Help me over." This battle may seem so simple, but only Wang Yuanyuan and the old magician knew how much Wang Yuanyuan had to bear in this battle. The collision of domains brought her immense pressure, and under this pressure, she still had to constantly calculate and pinpoint her target. She had to locate the spiritual stove, and finally, she had to drill into the spatial crack. Her life was still in danger. She wanted to defeat the enemy, but she also had to pay attention to her own safety. With all these pressures added together, she had to bear too much on her mind. At this point, in the second round of 6 battles, the Light of Dawn monster hunters had already won 2 battles and occupied the last 2 spots in the top 6. Chapter 251. The golden light of choice surged down, and Kai was once again enveloped within it. This time, her opponent came from the spiritual temple. The 4th match of the 5th round of the individual competition began. The summoner Kai was facing was a tall old man. To be able to enter the 5th round, he was definitely a powerhouse of the present age. This summoner's performance in the previous rounds was clearly seen by the members of the Bright Glimmer of Light Demon Hunt Squad. His strongest point was his summoned beast, a dragon, a true giant dragon. And this summoner was also the only dragon summoner in the sacred temple of the soul. Facing this dragon summoner, Kai felt a lot of pressure as she couldn't use any equipment. Although this summoner hadn't reached the domain realm yet, the dragon that he summoned was already a domain realm master. With a drawn-out dragon roar, a giant blue dragon appeared in the great trial grounds. As the dragon summoner, the old man sat on its head. If one wanted to defeat him, they would first have to defeat the giant dragon he had summoned. The dragon summoner grabbed the dragon's horn and looked at Kai. This giant blue dragon was of the water element, and its body was at least 50 meters long. Even in the vast area of the great trial field, it was still a colossal creature. Kai flashed and disappeared from the training field. She knew that this battle would be very difficult for her. She couldn't use the Grim Reaper scythe and the Tower of Eternity. Her strength was greatly restricted. It was too difficult to defeat this dragon. If she could use the Grim Reaper's 7 ultimate skills, she could still try. But now, she could only try to defeat the leader first. The dragon summoner focused his gaze. The water dragon was connected to his mind. It roared towards the sky, and an icy blue halo was released from its head. Generally speaking, aura-type skills had a limited range. However, this water-type dragon's aura seemed limitless, extending all the way to the trial ground's protective barrier, enveloping it completely. Kai's invisibility naturally couldn't be hidden under such circumstances. Her figure flashed, and she appeared in the field. Before the halo approached, she suddenly took a step forward, and her body disappeared once again. The halo swept past, but she still didn't appear. Space travel? This was a powerful ability that assassins had when they reached a certain level of cultivation. The dragon summoner smiled. This wasn't his first time facing an assassin, so he knew how to deal with it. The wings on the water dragon's back suddenly unfurled, and a terrifying blue tide burst out from its spread wings in the next moment. This was a true stormy sea, and the surging water elemental energy hid the sky and covered the earth within the grand trial grounds, instantly covering every corner. No matter where Kai appeared next, she would have to bear the impact of this water wave. Moreover, under the impact of such a huge amount of water elemental energy, some changes also appeared in the space. The closer one got to the center, the more frightening the water elemental energy fluctuations became. In the void, a crack quietly appeared in front of the water dragon's head. Kai took a step forward, and a pure white halo spread out from her body. The death scythe, condensed from the power of purification, went straight for the head of the water dragon. It wasn't that she didn't want to attack the dragon summoner, but the water elements released by the water dragon were too large. A layer of blue light had already appeared around his body. If Kai insisted on attacking him, she would definitely suffer the water dragon's strongest attack. The water dragon's eyes lit up, and it opened its mouth wide, spitting out a breath towards Kai. At the same time, the surrounding water elements suddenly turned into a huge whirlpool, pulling Kai-Er's body down, while a huge pillar of water rushed up from below, attacking from above and below. A trace of coldness appeared in Kai-Er's eyes. A white halo was emitted from her body. The seemingly gentle white not only withstood the water dragon's breath, but also purified all the water elements that came close. It was Kai's purification domain. The water dragon roared, and its huge body trembled slightly. It was clearly afraid of Kai's purification domain, but it also released its own domain at the same time. The azure color covered the entire training field, and all the water elements seemed to come to life. One after another, small dragons condensed from the water elements began to emerge from the domain. They didn't seem to be illusory at all, rushing towards Kai at high speed. At the same time, the water dragon's surroundings suddenly became illusory, as if there was a layer of water separating it from Kai. This was the dragon summoner's defense with the power of the domain. After all, Kai was the only assassin left in the temple tournament. She also had a domain. What if she used the power of the domain to break through the blockade? The dragon summoner's strength came from this giant dragon. All of his abilities were related to the giant dragon, and the two complemented each other. He connected his mind with the water dragon and commanded it to fight. Not only could he strengthen the water dragon's fighting skills, but he could also connect his spiritual power with the water dragon. The water dragon in front of him had a total spiritual power of almost 300,000. Facing the attacks of the water dragons, Kai-Er's eyes lit up. The power of purification seemed to be infinite, and it rapidly expanded through the purification domain. At the same time, she raised her right hand and stretched it out in front of her. There seemed to be some stubbornness in her eyes, but there was also a bit of expectation. The scattered petals began to shrink and condense in her palm. During this process, Kai-Er's body was like a terrifying whirlpool. When the small water dragons formed by the domain flew within a certain range of her body, they would instantly shatter and disappear, turning back into water elements. However, the power of purification around Kai-Er's body did not spread outwards and did not affect the water dragon's domain. The process of those white petals rapidly condensing was extremely beautiful. Kai-Er floated in midair, just like a fairy. Her purifying attribute had a special characteristic, and that was that it wouldn't be disturbed by any other attribute, even if the opponent used the power of a domain. No matter how rich the water element was, it was still water element, and in a situation where the purifying attribute didn't take the initiative to attack, the water element wouldn't be able to affect its ability. Water Dragon's eyes showed a bit of panic as it felt a huge threat from Kai-Er's body. Roar! In order to break the purification domain, an all-out collision was needed. Elements could not affect it, but skills could. All the small water dragons in the domain roared, and in an instant, everything in the water dragon's domain became brighter. The huge domain caused the entire great trial field to start spinning, turning into a huge whirlpool. Every water dragon turned into a stream of light in the whirlpool, and the water dragon itself and the dragon summoner disappeared in the huge domain. This huge whirlpool had an extremely terrifying suction force. Every stream of light that hit Kai-Er's purification domain would cause a violent explosion, and the white light of the purification domain would also fluctuate violently. As the whirlpool spun faster and faster, the impact became stronger and stronger. However, it was also at this time that the white lotus in Kai-Er's hand formed. Domain skill, flourishing lotus. The last time this lotus appeared in the Tower of Eternity, it did not really explode with its power. This time, however, Kai-Er threw it out without hesitation. This was a domain skill that Kai-Er could not completely control, and it was also her strongest attack besides the scythe of the god of death and the Tower of Eternity. However, could her domain skill defeat the water dragon? After the flourishing lotus flew out, it first released a round of purification power, then slowly flew above Kai-Er's head. Instantly, Kai-Er's clothes that were originally fluttering due to the water dragon's whirlpool calmed down. Then the flourishing lotus bloomed above Kai-Er's head. A circle of extreme white light suddenly spread out, and all the spectators in the great trial grounds felt as if their souls were being carved away at this moment. Even the great trial grounds' protective barrier seemed to be unable to protect them. Roar! The water dragon's roar was filled with intense panic, because it discovered that the circle of white light that erupted from the flourishing lotus did not intersect with its domain at all. It just continued to expand, and the water element did not have any effect on it. In other words, no skill could stop its advance. Even with its powerful soul power, as the white light approached, it felt as if its soul was being drawn out of its body. That's right, this was the most terrifying part of the purification power. The purification attribute purified the body, but also the soul. Kai-Er's flourishing lotus stripped away the purification power of the soul and amplified it to the greatest extent. No matter how strong one's strength was, once one's soul was damaged, one would suffer irreparable damage. The water dragon no longer dared to attack Kai. Its huge domain instantly shrank, turning into a huge bubble that protected its body. At the same time, its pair of dragon horns also released icy blue lightning, protecting its head. At this moment, all of its energy was used to protect its soul, to protect itself, and to protect the dragon summoner above its head. When the spiritual power density reached a certain level, it would more or less have some effect. Moreover, the water dragon could also feel that Kai-Er's purification domain was not really restraining its own water element, but the undead element. If it was an undead creature, even if it was twice as strong, it would instantly be turned into ashes by the flourishing lotus. However, it was of the water element, and there were not many dark things in its soul, so it would not be purified too much. However, if its soul was attacked, it would always be in great danger. It had to focus all of its attention on defense. The white halo of the flourishing lotus finally hit the water dragon's shield. There was no violent roar and spiritual power turbulence like the impact of spiritual power. The moment the two collided, a strange buzzing sound suddenly rang out in the great trial field. At this moment, all the spectating powerhouses felt their brains buzz and their vision went blank. It took a few seconds for them to recover. It felt like their souls had been instantly pulled out of their bodies, wandering outside for a while before returning to their bodies. This was definitely not a good experience. The powerhouses from the 6 great temples who had fought with Kai before couldn't help but be shocked. They never thought that Kai would have such a method. This domain was too terrifying. Even through the shield, they could feel such a strong feeling. If they were attacked head-on, how terrifying would it be? The dragon summoner and the water dragon told them the results. A strange scene appeared in the great trial field. The water dragon and the dragon summoner were both frozen in the distance. Above their heads, there was a shadow that looked like their bodies, but it was much smaller and transparent. It was dull, stiff, and even had a strong sense of shock. There was no doubt that their souls had been forcibly shaken out of their bodies by the flourishing lotus. Although the water dragon's shield had played a role, it didn't seem to be very effective. Its domain was also collapsing at an alarming rate, and the shield was quickly disappearing. However, after using the flourishing lotus, Kai-Er also seemed to be exhausted. Her body swayed as she fell from the sky, and she almost fell to the ground. A green bamboo staff appeared in her hand to support her body. From her pale face and the lack of spiritual power around her body, it could be seen that she didn't have much combat power left. However, her eyes were still firmly fixed on the water dragon and the dragon summoner in the sky, as if she was waiting for something. The souls that had been shaken out of their bodies slowly returned. In the end, they weren't really purified by the flourishing lotus. After all, the water dragon and the dragon summoner had connected their soul power at the critical moment. In addition, the defense of the domain had a certain effect. Although Kai-Er's attack had a great impact on their souls, it wasn't enough to make their souls collapse. After a full 10 seconds, the dragon summoner and the water dragon's souls finally returned to their bodies. They both let out a long breath. Even though the water dragon was so powerful, it was still weakened for a moment. It couldn't even maintain its wings. It fell from the sky and landed on the ground with a loud bang. The shield and domain around its body also shattered. The weakness of its soul made it unable to control its power at all. Who won and who lost? The spectators in the Sanctuary Alliance's great trial field could be said to be the strongest people in the 6 major temples of the Alliance. However, at this moment, no one could tell the outcome of the battle. Kai-Er's domain skill was unexpectedly powerful. It forcibly broke the joint domain of the water dragon and the dragon summoner and injured their souls. However, it seemed that Kai-Er didn't have much strength left. The water dragon and the dragon summoner should recover faster than her. Just when everyone was filled with doubts, suddenly, a white figure appeared behind the water dragon silently. In a flash, the figure appeared on top of the water dragon's head, and a sharp light went straight for the dragon summoner's throat. The timing was perfect. The dragon summoner's soul had just returned, and his body was affected by the impact of the water dragon's fall. He was confused. He only reacted when the sharp white light was pressed against his throat. However, it was clearly too late. If the white figure wanted to kill him, he would already be dead. The white figure was clearly Kai-Er. However, it was an illusory Kai-Er. After the grim Reaper's scythe in her hand touched the dragon summoner's throat, the figure slowly dissipated. Who could have expected this change? The dragon summoner only reacted when the outcome was decided. That doppelganger was obviously left outside by Kai, or before she released her domain skill. In other words, when she was invisible, she quietly completed the doppelganger skill. However, could an assassin release a doppelganger skill while invisible? No matter what the dragon summoner thought, he still lost this battle. In terms of overall strength, he wouldn't necessarily lose to Kai, who didn't have any equipment. Kai, won because of the flourishing lotus flower's bizarre plan. She knew very well that after using the flourishing lotus, she would not be able to continue fighting. That was why she prepared her doppelganger to appear. Under normal circumstances, her doppelganger would not be able to hurt her opponent at all. However, after being attacked by the flourishing lotus, the water dragon's domain skill was broken, and the dragon summoner was at his weakest. The reason why Kai had been staring at the dragon summoner was to find the best time to attack. However, it had to be said that Kai was strong enough. As the saint of reincarnation and a god's favored, she had some powerful abilities that ordinary assassins did not have. For example, she could create a doppelganger after turning invisible. Even the water dragon's domain skill could not detect the existence of her doppelganger. Therefore, the dragon summoner's loss was not too undeserved. With the green bamboo staff on the ground, Kai slowly walked out of the arena. The battle had ended here. As one of the strongest of the 6 temples, the dragon summoner could not go back on his word. Moreover, Chin Zidian was supervising him. At this point in the competition, the Light of Dawn monster hunters had basically confirmed their identity as the biggest winner of the individual competition. Among the top 6, they actually had the last 4 spots. Long Haochin stood at the entrance of the great trial field, quietly waiting for Kai to walk out of the field. Looking at her with the green bamboo staff on the ground, Long Haochin's eyes were full of tenderness. Obviously, he remembered the scene when he sent Kai home every day during the monster hunter's trial. Kai walked in front of Long Haochin and smiled. Long Haochin took her little hand and helped her back to her seat. At this time, the light of choice appeared again. Long Haochin raised his head subconsciously. There were only 2 matches left in the top 12. As the leader of the Light of Dawn monster hunters, he had yet to fight. However, this time, the light of choice didn't shine on the Light of Dawn. Instead, it fell on the other 2 contestants. One was a powerhouse from the Knights Templars, and the other was from the Soul Temple. As such, the last remaining match was naturally between Long Haochin and the last person from the Magic Temple. Seeing that he wasn't going to fight in this match, Long Haochin waved at Han Yu. Han Yu had already received instructions from Long Haochin. Because he had lost the previous match, he wasn't in the contestant area. However, he was in the spectator area closest to the contestant area. After receiving a signal from Long Haochin, Han Yu nodded gently, indicating that he understood. Then he slowly closed his eyes. No one noticed that among the Light of Dawn monster hunters, Kai, Wang Yuan Yuan and Lin Xian each had a golden spot on their backs. They were leaning against the backrest behind them, and the spot was completely covered. Only the members of the Light of Dawn monster hunters knew what was happening. This was the effect of Han Yu's spiritual stove of light's blessing. Along with the increase in his cultivation, Han Yu's spiritual stove of light's protection had also undergone 2 evolutions. The current spiritual stove of light's protection wasn't only capable of restoring spiritual energy within a certain range. More importantly, Han Yu had connected the spiritual stove of light's protection with the soul chain of the 7 members of the Bright Glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad. Within a certain range, he could use the guidance of the soul chain to help restore the spiritual energy of any member of the Bright Glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad. At the same time, the fewer people assisting, the faster the recovery speed. Previously, Long Houchin did not let Hanyu take action because his spiritual stove of light's blessing could only be used once a day, and it had to be used at the most critical moment. At this time, the fifth match had already begun. Lin Xin, Wang Yuan, and Kai were all greatly exhausted. Next, he would be in the sixth match. After the sixth match, the sixth round would begin immediately, and he would not have much time to recover. If Long Houchin had been chosen by the light of choice to participate in the fifth match, he could have delayed the use of the spiritual stove of light for a while, and he would have benefited from it. However, time waited for no one, so he had to use it in advance. After all, with the heart of eternity, his spiritual power recovery speed was far faster than that of his other partners. It had to be said that Han Yu's increase in spiritual power was considered cheating. However, Long Houchin was magnanimous. Everything he did was for the better development of the Temple League. The 6 temples had formed this loose alliance for 6,000 years. The 6 temples were deeply rooted in their own ways, and they had an extremely complicated relationship with each other. It was really difficult to break out of this complicated situation. In the end, there would only be various restraints. If he wanted to truly complete the reorganization of the alliance, even if he succeeded on the surface, there might not be much change in reality. Therefore, Long Houchin had already thought about the outcome. What he had to do was to do his best to make the Light of Dawn stand out in this temple tournament. Although the Light of Dawn monster hunters had a weak foundation and there were only a few of them, they also had unique advantages. Putting aside the status and origin of each of them in their respective temple, they belonged to different temples, which gave them a natural advantage. After experiencing so many things, Long Houchin had finally reached this step today. In his plan, the new alliance had to be established, and as the son of the Holy Light, he had to be one of the leaders of the new alliance. With the vitality of the Light of Dawn and their strength, he had to make the greatest contribution to the reorganization of the alliance. For the sake of this plan, a little bit of cheating was not important. What was important was the result. Long Houchin believed that their performance in the individual competition of the temple tournament had convinced most of the higher-ups of the alliance. The further they went in the temple tournament and the higher their results, the more authority they would have in the meeting after the tournament, and the more people would support them. The competition in the arena was intense. One person from the Soul Temple and the Knights Templars had been eliminated. This battle would determine whether any of them could enter the top 6. Hence, the competition was particularly intense. The collision between the 2 powerhouses caused cracks to appear in the shield of the great trial field from time to time, and the referees continued to reinforce it. Nobody knew that the 3 demon hunters of the bright glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad were currently recovering at an astonishing speed despite having consumed a lot of energy. The spiritual stove of Light's blessing was very useful in this kind of point-to-point recovery. Not only could it increase their own recovery speed, but Han Yu could also transform his own spiritual power through the spiritual stove of Light's blessing into the purest elemental power and inject it into his companions. This was what he had learned after absorbing pure spiritual power in the Tower of Eternity. With the improvement of his cultivation, Han Yu had become more and more inclined to support. As a powerhouse who was already a rank 9 powerhouse, even if it was purely a support, it was still a very powerful existence. Han Yu had his own goal, and that was to become a Knight of the Seal. The competition in the arena lasted for a full quarter of an hour. In the end, the Knight and the Summoner ended the competition in a way that almost caused both sides to lose. In the end, the Knight, who had a domain, won the final victory. However, he had only won by a narrow margin. He had consumed a lot of spiritual power, and even his domain had collapsed. It was obvious that he would not be able to recover in a short time. Finally, it was Long Houchin's turn to enter the arena. Without the descent of the Light of Choice, he and the magician walked into the arena together. 5 of the top 6 had been decided. The Light of Dawn's advantage in the individual competition was unshakable. The knight who had advanced had consumed too much spiritual power in the previous battle. After leaving the arena, he almost fainted. 3 monster hunters from the light of dawn had advanced, and it was very likely that they would draw him. This meant that the light of dawn already had 1 person in the top 3. Although Li Jingji was also trying his best to recover his spiritual power, he had also consumed a lot of it. Even if he could enter the top 3, the light of dawn was likely to get another spot. The key was the battle in front of them. Everyone knew that Long Haochen was the leader of the Light of Dawn monster hunters, and he was also the strongest. Not to mention that he had a higher chance of winning. Even if he lost this match, the magician would not have an easy time. Once the Light of Dawn monster hunters obtained 2 spots in the final 3, and both of them decided not to participate in the final 3-person round-robin competition. The final champion of the individual competition would definitely belong to the Light of Dawn monster hunters. Therefore, at this point in the competition, the Light of Dawn monster hunters had already been shrouded in a huge halo. Long Haochen calmly faced the magician in front of him. His opponent was wearing a yellow robe. Although it wasn't a magician's robe, it showed his attributes. He was an earth element magician. After the 2 of them expressed their determination to each other, the last match of the 12 to the top 6 officially began. This time, Long Haochen did not cast the light god domain immediately. He took a step forward, and 6 wings flashed behind him. The 6 wings flapped, and his body flashed towards his opponent like a stream of light. Light flash, a golden hexagram, slowly spread out from the position he left. The holy unicorn slowly appeared on the battlefield after Long Haochen flew out. It flapped its wings and flew high. During the process of the light flash, Long Haochen had already condensed a double sword with the Lingang. The heavy sword split in the air, and a cross-shaped slash was already attacking his opponent. The earth element magician did not panic at all. He made a gesture with both hands in front of his chest. Immediately after, Long Haochen felt his body sink, and his speed suddenly decreased. It was the gravity spell. At the same time, the earth element magician was like a warrior. He slapped his palm towards Long Haochen from afar. A terrifying scene appeared. A mountain suddenly appeared in midair. It was at least 20 meters tall, and it blocked Long Haochen's body. The cross-shaped slash landed on the mountain with a loud bang. Long Haochen's body followed closely behind. In everyone's opinion, Long Haochen should dodge. Although the mountain appeared suddenly, and it was an instantaneous spell, it was very solid and heavy. It was not a good idea to face it head-on. Moreover, it seemed that as long as he dodged, the mountain would not be of much use. However, Long Haochen did not do so. His figure flashed, and he collided with the mountain. Immediately after, the mountain stopped in midair. The earth element magician's expression froze. He knew that his opponent had seen through his magic. He wanted nothing more than for Long Haochen to dodge. He still had a backup plan for this mountain spell, which could be used together with the gravity spell. However, Long Haochen directly collided with the mountain. It was obvious that he had broken the earth element magician's backup plan. The earth element magician quickly chanted a spell, and the mountain in the air only paused for 3 seconds. Then there was a deafening roar. Countless stones and soil scattered in the air, and a shocking sword intent appeared in midair. Long Haochen had used his own sword intent to break the mountain. In the next moment, he had already rushed in front of the earth magician. The speed brought by the 6 wings was too fast. Moreover, with the help of light speed flash, the earth element magician had no chance of dodging. Hence, he simply did not dodge. A layer of transparent light enveloped his body. Long Haochen's 2 swords formed by Lingang slashed at it, and there was a series of clanging sounds. However, the shield did not move, and there seemed to be no signs of damage. What a strong defense! Upon a closer look, one would discover that the transparent light shield was different from ordinary magic shields. There seemed to be countless cuts on it, and under the illumination of the light, it released a dazzling luster, like a hollowed-out diamond. Diamond Star Shield. This was one of the most powerful defense spells of the earth element. Long Houchin was not discouraged after being knocked back. His body froze slightly, and the holy unicorn behind him had already caught up. A ray of holy light shot out from its horn, shining on Long Houchin's body, dyeing his body in 7 colors. The monstrous sword intent erupted again. Long Houchin had a solemn expression on his face. The heavy swords in his hands joined together above his head, and in an instant he slashed down. At this time, circles of earthy yellow halos rose from the feet of the earth element magician. This magic, god-level earth element magician was indeed unique in defense. The rising yellow halos made the diamond star shield shine brightly. Clang! Long Houchin bounced back with his sword. Although a crack appeared on the diamond star shield, it was quickly repaired by the yellow halos inside. What a strong defense! Long Houchin was also shocked. In terms of defense, this earth element magician was probably not inferior to the strongest shield knight of Knights Templars. The heart of eternity was beating violently. Listening to the earth element magician's continuous chanting, Long Houchin calmed down. The golden halos quietly spread, and the light god's domain finally appeared. Not only that, but as soon as the light god's domain appeared, it began to transform into the domain's skill, Divine Light Waltz. The earth element magician's expression changed slightly, but his chanting did not change at all. The yellow halos surging under his feet also became more intense. His domain was called Solidification. It sounded simple, but in reality it could give any earth-type magic an extremely strong defense. When he was young, he had been nicknamed the Tortoiseshell. In terms of defense, he was definitely number 1 in the magic sanctuary. Even if Li Jingji wanted to defeat him, he would need to exhaust his mana in order to end the battle and suppress him with his cultivation base. Before he entered the arena, Li Jingji had already given him instructions. With the earth element magician's attack power, it would be very difficult for him to defeat Long Houchin. Li Jingji's advice to him was to exhaust Long Houchin. Long Houchin would definitely be eager to win, so he would definitely activate his domain power and find an opportunity to exhaust Long Houchin. Even if he lost to Long Houchin in the end, he would definitely be able to exhaust his spiritual power, which would give Li Jingji a chance in the next round. Although Li Jingji also knew that if 2 of the top 3 came from the Light of Dawn, there might not be a final individual champion. He still had to fight with all his might. In his opinion, although Kai Air's domain was strange, it had consumed too much of her spiritual power. The only one from the Light of Dawn monster hunters that could truly pose a threat to him was Long Houchin. Long Houchin's divine light waltz appeared for the second time. Compared to the first time, it was obviously smaller, as if his spiritual power had not recovered. When the divine light waltz and the diamond starry shield collided, the strongest attack and the strongest defense collided. The ear-piercing sound of friction made most people cover their ears immediately. This sound was really too unpleasant to hear. Countless starlight appeared where the 2 skills collided. Under the intense magic and vibration, the divine light waltz slowly cut inwards, but the speed at which it advanced was very slow. Everyone could see that the spiritual power of both sides was being consumed rapidly. The earth element magician's chanting became faster and faster. As one of the strongest in the magic temple, he did not want to be beaten up by such a young man. In the magic temple, his status was even higher than Lin Chen's. The intense yellow halo gradually blurred everything inside the diamond starry shield. The terrifying earth element seemed to be compressing and accumulating, as if it could explode at any time. Long Houchin, on the other hand, turned a blind eye to this. Under the buff of the holy unicorn, the powerful cutting power of his divine light waltz was becoming stronger and stronger. A small hole had already been cut open on the diamond star barrier. The divine light waltz continued to push forward. At this rate, it would take at most 2 more minutes for Long Houchin to defeat this Earth Magician. Chapter 252. Finally, the Earth Magician finished his incantation. If he had focused on defense, the Divine Light Waltz would have cut in even slower, and maintaining the domain attack would have consumed an astronomical amount of spiritual energy for Long Houchin. He would definitely be able to last longer. Even if Long Houchin won in the end, he wouldn't have much spiritual energy left. But the Earth Magician wasn't willing to give up. Now that he had come this far, who would want to give up the chance to win? Thus, his most powerful attack spell was finally completed. A crystal-clear little earth elemental gradually appeared in front of him, and with a whoosh it drilled into the ground. When it reappeared, it was already a giant earth elemental that was more than 10 meters tall. What was even more shocking was that its body was completely the color of the diamond star shield, as if it was made of diamonds. Leaping up, it clenched its fists and smashed them down towards Long Houchin. Moreover, as soon as it appeared, the earth elemental within the great trial field's protective shield increased in intensity. Leaping up high and then crashing down, it just happened to avoid the Divine Light Waltz's horizontal slash. The corner of Long Houchin's mouth revealed a faint smile. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. If the opponent had only used Werther's domain to resist to the end, then he could only use brute force to slowly break through it. However, the opponent had used such a powerful forbidden spell, so it was different. Perhaps the Diamond Earth Elemental's defensive power was comparable to the Starry Shield, but don't forget, it didn't have the support of a domain. Moreover, it was a spell that had left its master. A purple-gold light flashed in Long Houchin's eyes, and in the next moment, a giant figure appeared out of thin air above his head. Like a giant hammer, its tail swung up and fiercely hit the Diamond Earth Elemental. At the same time, a layer of 6 colors exploded. 6 elements, Chaos Elemental stripping. The Diamond Earth Elemental was a forbidden spell-level existence, yet it was still sent flying by this heavy blow. What was even more frightening was that when the 6-colored halo spread out, both the Diamond Earth Elemental and the Earth Element Magician's Diamond Starry Shield underwent drastic changes. The Earth Elemental fluctuated wildly under the Chaos Elemental stripping. The Diamond Earth Elemental was in a better condition. It was a top-notch Earth Elemental summoning spell. Although the Chaos Elemental stripping caused many cracks to appear on its huge body, it did not directly shatter. However, on the other side, the Earth Magician could not hold on any longer. Originally, he had been defending passively under the attack of Long Houchin's Divine Light Waltz. He had hoped to use the Diamond Earth element to turn the tide of the battle. However, not only did he fail to turn the tide of the battle, he even suffered the impact of the 6-attribute Chaos Elemental stripping. Although the Divine Light Waltz was also affected, it was a domain skill of a higher level. In addition, Long Houchin's light attribute was extremely pure, so the effect was much smaller than his opponent's. Boom! The Diamond Starlight barrier shattered, and the Divine Light Waltz was about to cut the Earth Element Magician's body. This Earth Mage was also quite good. With a flash of white light, the Diamond Earth Element in the air instantly appeared in front of him and integrated with his body, blocking the impact of the Divine Light Waltz. However, the Earth Element Magician's domain skill was torn apart the moment the Diamond Starlight barrier was broken. How could he have time to recover in such a short time? A huge wound was left on the Diamond Earth Element's body. In the face of the terrifying cutting power of the Divine Light Waltz, the Earth Element splashed out for a moment. Its body, which was already full of cracks, staggered back. Its chest and abdomen were almost cut in half. The Divine Light Waltz stopped, and Long Houchin slashed out with a sword in the void. This time his whole body was emitting a rich layer of purplish gold luster. His sword will and sword soul had combined into one, in addition to the power of Long Haoyue's bloodline. The purplish gold sword flashed in the air and cut horizontally into the huge wound on the Diamond Earth Element's body. With a flash of yellow light, the earth element magician had already dashed out. He was not going to perish together with the diamond earth element. The diamond earth element was very powerful in terms of attack. Although its defense was also very strong, it could not compare to the diamond starlight barrier that was supported by the domain skill. Puff! Its huge body was broken in the middle and fell to the ground with a loud bang. When Hao Yue reappeared, he was already in front of the diamond earth elemental. With a sweep of his long tail, the diamond earth elemental's 2 halves were instantly sent flying. At the same time, his 6 heads roared in unison and spat out 6 breaths at the earth elemental magician. The earth element magician was a little flustered at this time. The diamond starlight barrier could not be recovered in a short time. In the face of Hao Yue's attack, he could only use a low-level earth element barrier again. At this point in the battle, there was no suspense about the outcome. Long Haochen's figure flashed again, and he was already behind the earth element magician, and the elemental destruction aura bloomed. The diamond star barrier was able to block the elemental annihilation halo contained in the divine light waltz, but it was not so easy for the diamond star barrier to block the divine light waltz's elemental annihilation halo. Coupled with Hao Yue's frontal attack, it only took a minute for the earth mage to choose to admit defeat. Light of Dawn Monster Hunters, 4th person, advanced. At this point in the competition, Light of Dawn had the overall upper hand in the individual competition. To them, there was basically only 1 round left. Although Knight, who had entered the top 6, had woken up, he did not look like he had much combat power left. Now it was up to Li Jingji whether he could make it to the top 3. In the 5th round, each winner could obtain 16 points, and the total number of points had changed accordingly. Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had advanced in the 5th round with a total of 64 points. Together with the previous 96 points, they had a total of 160 points. Knights, Templars, and Magic Temple each advanced, with 105 and 98 points respectively, ranked 2nd and 3rd. The other 3 major temples' points did not change. Soul Temple was 4th with 58 points, Assassin Temple was still 4th with 34 points, and Warrior Temple was still at 24 points. At this point in the competition, Light of Dawn Monster Hunters could be said to be in the lead, and there was no doubt that they would become the champion of the individual competition. Before this year's competition, who would have thought that the top 6 of the individual competition would end up like this? In the past temple tournaments, there had never been a temple that could achieve such an impressive result. It had to be said that Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had a certain amount of luck to reach this stage, and they also had the secret help of Knights Templars. However, if they were not strong enough, they would not be able to reach this stage. Among the 4 people who advanced, 3 of them had Domain Realm Masters, and 1 of them had been eliminated. Whether it was in terms of strategy, tactics, or strength, Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had fully demonstrated their strength as titled Monster Hunters. The 6th round of the competition begins now. Chun Zidian's voice was still calm and full of authority. It was time for the final ranking of the individual competition. Long Haochen immediately returned to the resting area after the competition ended. He did not want to be the first to fight. In the following matches, as long as he was not the first to fight, he would have a certain amount of time to recover. With the strong recovery ability of the Heart of Eternity, he was confident that he would be able to recover his spiritual power to a certain extent. However, for the sake of fairness and balance, when the light of choice shone again, it landed on Long Haochen first. The other golden light accurately shone on Li Jingji's body. When the 2 light of choice stabilized, the entire Sanctuary Alliance's great training field became a little chaotic. The first match of the 6th round was actually between Long Haochen and Li Jingji. It could be said that this was the most crucial battle since the start of the individual competition. If Li Jingji could defeat Long Haochen, then the Magic Temple's points would still be behind the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters, but the difference would not be too big. Li Jingji would enter the final 3. Even if the other 2 members of Light of Dawn Monster Hunters refused to participate in the round-robin competition, The halo of the strongest person in the alliance would definitely fall on him. No one could say whether this battle was fair or not. The battle between Long Houchin and the Earth Magician was definitely not as exhausting as the battle between Li Jingji and Qining. However, Long Houchin had just finished his match, and Li Jingji was also the first to fight in the previous round, so he had plenty of time to rest. No matter what, the light of choice had already been chosen, and it would not change. Long Houchin's expression was a little solemn, but there was a hint of joy in the depths of Li Jingji's eyes. It was obvious that he was very satisfied with the choice of the light of choice. Facing Long Houchin was the situation that he most wanted to see. The moment they walked into the great training field, the entire place suddenly became so quiet that even the drop of a needle could be heard. Long Houchin knocked his right fist on the left side of his chest and gave Li Jingji a standard knight salute. "Greetings, Temple Masterly," Li Jingji smiled and said emotionally, "I really did not expect that you would be my final opponent in this temple tournament. Do you still remember when we met a few years ago? I told you that the next temple tournament would be the time for you to challenge me, but you brought the time forward by 10 years. The future is the world of you youngsters. However, what I said will not change. If you want to challenge the Demon Emperor on my behalf, then you must first defeat me. Come, let me see if you can reach that step." Long Houchin nodded slightly and placed his right fist across his chest. As he bowed again, the 6 spiritual wings that he had just retracted broke out of his back once more and carried his body into the air. Li Jingji quickly began to chant an incantation. His eyes were fixed on Long Houchin the entire time. A thick green light spread out, and his chanting carried a strange rhythm that spread throughout the entire field. Long Houchin did not directly use light speed flash to launch an attack like before. In his chest, the heart of eternity throbbed violently, restoring his spiritual power. At the same time, he pointed his right hand in front of him, and the holy unicorn, Star King, once again came to his side. "Star King, lend me your strength." Long Houchin stroked its big head. The Star King nodded slightly and spread its wings. From its horn, a dazzling ball of rainbow starlight lit up. In an instant, the rainbow light spread out and enveloped both of them. Long Houchin flipped over and mounted the horse. The rainbow starlight fell down and shot into the sky, forming a straight rainbow pillar of light that directly hit the top of the protective barrier. Although the Star King had already become a holy unicorn, its foundation was still the king of starlight unicorns. This was its star domain. Back then, in order to help Long Houchin, it had forcefully used this skill. Now, with its stage 9 cultivation, it could use the star domain with ease. Although the star domain was not a true domain, it was extremely close to it. Extremely rich light elements condensed into Long Houchin's body under the intense beating of the heart of eternity. Long Houchin's spiritual power was recovering at an alarming rate. The Star King's eyes lit up and it let out a long neigh. The horn on its forehead shone brightly and enveloped both it and Long Houchin. From the outside, no one could see their figures clearly. Everyone had a trump card. Just like how Li Jingji had never used his strongest ability, Long Houchin also had his strongest state that he had never used. When facing Yang Haoyu, he did not have the chance to use it. He had to constantly use his domain to resist his opponent. But now, facing Li Jingji, this could very well be his last battle. What else could Long Houchin hold back? The rainbow light disappeared. When Long Houchin reappeared in front of everyone, he could not help but exclaim in surprise. At this moment, his entire body was covered in a dazzling rainbow armor. The rainbow light flowed, and he seemed to have the temperament of a knight of the seal. The 7-colored light represented a divine artifact. The 7-colored armor formed by the Holy Unicorn was equivalent to a divine artifact. With the help of the star domain, it allowed Long Houchin to recover more than 80% of the spirit force he had consumed. As the mount that was the most compatible with the knight, the Holy Unicorn seemed to only play a supporting role in the previous battle. Moreover, it was not very strong. This caused many people to look down on it. But in reality, although the Star King had not advanced for long and did not possess many of the Holy Unicorn's abilities, it was still a true Holy Unicorn. Covered in the holy armor, Long Houchen's eyes were dazzling. Coupled with the 6 wings on his back and his extremely handsome face, all the women present could not take their eyes off him. "How you Long Houchen shouted. With a flash of purple light, Hao Yue appeared next to him again. But this time, Hao Yue directly turned into a purplish gold light and surged towards Long Houchen. The spectators had seen Hao Yue transform into armor before. During the battle between Long Houchen and Yang Haoyu, he used this to evolve his domain again and obtained victory. Was he going to wear 2 sets of armor? But soon they knew that they were wrong. Hao Yue did not transform into armor. Instead, he turned into a giant sword and appeared in Long Houchen's hands. The Holy Unicorn transformed into armor, and Hao Yue turned into a purplish gold sword. Under the situation where he could not use other equipment, this was Long Houchen's strongest state. Chapter 253. This was the first time Hao Yue had transformed into a sword. Compared to Long Houchen's 2 legendary swords, the sword Hao Yue had transformed into was much larger. The length of the sword was 10 feet, and its entire body was purplish gold. The hilt was 1 meter long, and Long Houchen had to hold it with both hands to unleash its combat power. On this gigantic sword, there were 9 lines of light extending from the hilt to the tip of the sword. The blade was thick and heavy, and there were 6 mini Hao Yue heads intertwining on the hilt. All of them looked like they were spitting out energy, as if the blade was spat out by them. The moment he held the sword, Long Houchen felt that the sword contained an unparalleled and terrifying power. After connecting with the power of his bloodline, this power seemed to be an extension of his body. As a knight, Long Houchen was very sensitive to his own weapon. In front of this purplish gold Hao Yue sword, both Blue Rain, Hibiscus of Light, and Aria of the Goddess of Light paled in comparison. Vaguely, Long Houchen felt that this gigantic sword contained the aura of the 6 elemental chaos stripping. He did not expect Hao Yue to be so powerful after transforming into a sword. Just as Long Houchen transformed his 2 magical beast companions into equipment, Li Jingji had completed his incantation on the other side. A gigantic green shadow appeared behind him. It was the wind god summoning. A gigantic wind god that looked exactly like Li Jingji appeared out of thin air. At first, its huge body was 15 meters tall, but strangely, it was actually shrinking its body size. In just a short while, it had shrunk from 15 meters to 5 meters. Although it was still huge, it looked much more agile. A green gold armor covered its entire body, and a gigantic sword was held horizontally in its hand. Without a doubt, this was Li Jingji's most powerful wind god summoning. It was clearly different from the wind god he used against Chening. Not only was the weapon different, but the degree of materialization was also different. Li Jingji's entire body emitted a green light. In a flash, he had already hidden within the summoned wind god. Instantly, the gigantic wind god's eyes lit up, as if it had been injected with intelligence. It stared at Long Houchen with a burning gaze and pointed its long sword at the sky. Instantly, a hurricane burst forth from its body. It was the wind god domain and its first domain skill, Hurricane. The green light surged like a tidal wave, sweeping towards Long Houchen in a frenzy. Long Houchen, on the other hand, appeared very calm. A layer of golden light instantly spread out from the divine unicorn's 7-colored armor, and the light god's domain was released. 2 completely different colors, gold and green, suddenly collided. As Li Zhengji had used a domain skill, Long Houchen's light god's domain showed signs of retracting the moment the 2 lights collided in the air. However, a layer of white flames could be clearly seen burning at the point where the 2 domains came into contact. When the hurricane hit the white flames, it clearly showed signs of trembling, and there were even wisps of green light rising from the white flames. Attribute suppression. This was the suppression of attributes in a battle of domains. For Long Houchin, this was already the last match of the individual competition, so he didn't need to hold anything back. The power of the light god domain was fully unleashed at this moment. The pure light element was enough to suppress any of the other powerhouses present. The true power of the light god domain was undoubtedly on full display, although Li Jingji's domain also had the aura of the wind god, and with his cultivation base he had already condensed his wind element to a certain extent. However, compared to Long Houchin, there was an insurmountable gap in terms of the purity of his element. Long Houchin's light element did not only come from his sun of light constitution, but also from the sun-moon divine snail and the sun of light constitution of the necromancer Electrolux. With the combination of the three great lights, even if the goddess of light was conscious, she couldn't compare to Long Houchin in terms of purity of spiritual energy. He deserved the title of light god. Although Li Jingji's domain was called the wind god, it was just a name he came up with. It wasn't the real wind god. Even if the purity of his element was comparable to Long Houchin's, wind was still weaker than light. Therefore, although it seemed like Long Houchin's light god domain was being suppressed, in reality, he had the upper hand in the collision of domains. The wind god moved. In a flash, he arrived at the edge of the collision of the two domains. He slashed with the long sword in his hand. Instantly, a layer of green-gold light emitted a hazy fog and slashed towards the light god domain. Although the sword was very far away from Long Houchin could clearly feel the sharpness of the sword. This was the perfect combination of the sword, intent, and wind. Long Houchin was secretly shocked. Li Jingji was a sorcerer. He was able to use his own skill to display the sword intent as a sorcerer. This talent was indeed amazing. Long Houchin didn't dodge or retreat. At this moment, if he retreated, he would definitely be attacked by Li Jingji's light god domain. With the protection of the wind god domain, he wouldn't be affected too much by the light god domain. More importantly, once he entered his domain, Long Houchin wouldn't be able to perform the divine light waltz that he had just comprehended not long ago. Therefore, Long Houchin didn't retreat. Instead, he moved forward and faced the attack head-on. He held the purple-gold Haoyue sword with both hands. His entire body became one with the sword, and he made an upward, slashing motion. A layer of purplish-gold sword light suddenly shot out from the purple-gold Haoyue sword. What surprised Long Houchin was that his sword soul couldn't merge with the giant sword that Haoyue had transformed into. This giant sword gave him the feeling that, apart from his spiritual power and will, it rejected all other abilities. The purplish gold sword light was only 3 feet long. Compared to the sword light from Li Jingji's wind god, there was a huge difference. However, the moment the two strong lights collided, an unexpected scene occurred. At this moment, the wind god was completely under Li Jingji's control. When the long sword in his hand slashed towards Long Houchin with the help of his wind god domain and his wind god domain, he was confident that this attack would at least force Long Houchin to retreat. Then, he would use the wind god domain to forcefully break into Long Houchin's domain. Although Long Houchin had the upper hand in terms of domains, he had already comprehended 2 domain skills. Coupled with his many years of research and understanding of domains that far surpassed Long Houchin, he was confident that he could completely suppress Long Houchin and obtain the final victory. However, when his long sword collided with the purple light released by the purplish-gold Haoyue sword in Long Houchin's hand, Li Jingji felt an indescribably terrifying roar in his head. Then, the sword light released by his long sword was dyed purple. A purplish-gold light shot out from the giant sword in Long Houchin's hand like a shocking rainbow. The terrifying aura that was filled with destruction and destruction forced Li Jingji to retreat. At the same time, he flipped the long sword in his hand and forcefully cut off the connection between him and the sword light. Wherever the purplish-gold sword light passed by, the hurricanes in the wind god domain shattered. The sword light hit the protective shield of the great trial ground, and the protective shield shook violently. Then the purplish-gold light suddenly broke a hole in the protective shield and penetrated the ceiling of the Sanctuary Alliance's great trial ground. Even Long Haochen was stunned, let alone Li Jingji, who was in a difficult situation. He had never expected the power of the sword transformed by the Haoyue sword to be so terrifying. It seemed to have surpassed the power of an ordinary god weapon. The purplish-gold sword light didn't seem particularly powerful. However, when Li Zhengji's wind attribute Linggang came into contact with it, it was instantly assimilated and dispersed. It could no longer be described as a god weapon. Moreover, from the purplish-gold Haoyue sword, Long Haochen could clearly sense a madness that was filled with destruction. He subconsciously swung the sword in his hand horizontally. Instantly, a purplish-gold light screen swept out. Wherever the purple light passed, the hurricanes were instantly flattened. Countless cracks appeared on Li Jingji's wind god domain, as though it could collapse at any time. After a brief moment of shock, Li Jingji regained his senses. He swung the long sword in his hand again, and a small wind blade shot out towards Long Haochen. It was the second territory technique that he had used against Chan Ing, or freedom. This territory technique that contained the true essence of the wind reached Long Haochen in an instant. Long Haochen took half a step back and pointed the purplish-gold Haoyue sword in front of him. Ding! A crisp sound was heard in the air. The wind blade shattered, but countless fine and dense gusts of wind turned into a large number of wind blades in the air and swept towards Long Haochen. It was the purplish-gold Haoyue sword again. A layer of purple radiance was emitted from the super god sword. In an instant, all the wind blades that were shooting towards him disappeared in the purple radiance. This was the fusion of the Haoyue bloodline power and the 6 elemental chaos stripping. After a brief attempt, Long Haochen gradually felt that as long as he had the sword in his hand, he could control the world. This was the domineering aura that Haoyue gave him. This super godly sword was something that only he could control. Although he didn't know how Haoyue did it, a godly sword that could even resist Li Jingji's second domain technique was definitely a powerful weapon. However, after a short period of contact, Long Haochen also discovered some problems with the purplish-gold Haoyue sword. Firstly, this god sword could only be activated with pure spiritual power, which drained his spiritual power at a terrifying rate. After 3 strikes, he had already drained more than 30,000 points of spiritual power. At the same time, when he used this god sword, he could not use it to attack and could only use it to slash. This was when the Haoyue was in its 6-headed state. The purplish-gold Haoyue sword already had such power. If it evolved into an 8-headed state and transformed into a sword, how terrifying would its power be? Although the consumption of spiritual power was huge, Long Haochen could still bear it. The Heart of Eternity was helping him recover his spiritual power quickly. At the same time, the Holy Unicorn armor also provided him with an additional 200,000 points of spiritual power, which was enough for him to continue fighting. When Li Jingji saw that his true essence of wind was so easily broken by Long Haochen, his expression became extremely solemn. He knew that this battle was probably not as he had expected. Not only was it difficult, but victory seemed to be getting further and further away from him. However, as the leader of the Mage Sanctuary and a powerhouse with great ambitions, he definitely wouldn't admit defeat so easily. Li Jingji knew very well that the more powerful an ability was, the greater the price one had to pay to unleash it. Long Haochen's divine sword was definitely not something that could be wielded so easily. Thus, he swung the long blade in his hand again, and streaks of the true essence of wind flew towards Long Haochen, launching an all-out attack. Long Haochen took steady steps towards his opponent. At this moment, He had already shrunk the light god's domain to reduce the consumption of his spiritual power as much as possible. With the terrifying power of the purplish gold Haoyue sword, the wind god's domain was no longer a threat to him. The 9 purplish gold light patterns on Long Haochen's forehead shone even more brightly, and even his eyes turned purplish gold. Although the purplish gold Haoyue sword continuously transmitted destructive intents to him, as the owner of the light god's physique, Long Haochen's mind was like his heart of eternity and would not be easily tainted. Long Haochen let go of the legendary sword in his hand. Li Zhengji's true essence of wind was useless against the purple-gold luminous moon sword. The swords shattered in the air one after another, and the distance between Long Haochen and Li Zhengji was getting closer and closer. After Long Haochen stepped into the wind god's domain, the terrifying power released by the purplish gold Haoyue sword caused the wind god's domain to show signs of shattering. Once the wind god's domain was completely shattered, Li Jingji's domain technique would naturally not be able to continue. On the VIP platform of the Knights Templars, Yang Haoyu sat beside Qin Zidian with a shocked expression. He muttered to himself, "I initially thought that I was going easy on this brat, but I didn't expect him to be the one going easy on me. His magical beast is so powerful, no wonder it could even destroy the demon god pillars." Qin Zidian smiled faintly and said, "In the Yangtze River, the waves behind push the waves in front, and the waves in front die on the beach. What's so strange about that? In the past, when your cultivation surpassed mine, I was the same as you now. However, with Haochen's temperament, his magical beast is a bit too overbearing." Yang Haoyu smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about that. Although his magical beast is special, it is bound by the blood contract after all." Qin Zidian nodded and said, "This little guy is really patient. He only used his full strength in the last battle. I think his magical beast transformed into a divine sword can be called a domain wielder. Li Jingji's wind god domain is not only able to use 2 domain wielder techniques, but it has also completed a round of evolution. If this level of domain wielder is unable to stop the purplish golden sword intent, I'm afraid no other domain wielder can stop it. As long as Haochen's cultivation is sufficient, it is not impossible for him to challenge the demon god emperor in the future." Yang Haoyu's eyes lit up and said, "If he can obtain the recognition of the eternal throne of God with the help of this magical sword, the hope of humankind will really come, and he will live up to his name of Light of Dawn." The outcome of the battle gradually became clear. Long Haochen had completely retracted his light god's domain, while Li Zhengji's wind god's domain was swaying in the wind and rain, as though it could shatter at any time. The power of Li Jingji's wind god's domain was getting weaker and weaker, while Long Haochen felt that the magical sword in his hand was getting heavier and heavier. The purplish gold Haoyue sword consumed a lot of energy. Even with the recovery speed of his heart of eternity, it could not keep up with this consumption. Moreover, he had yet to recover his spiritual power from the previous battle. Li Jingji suddenly let out a long roar towards the sky. The wind god domain, which was full of cracks, suddenly closed up. He raised the long blade in his hand and absorbed all the green light onto his long blade. Immediately after, it was as if a green lightning had appeared in midair. With a flash, it appeared in front of Long Haochen. This strike came without any warning, but it was much more powerful than all the previous attacks. Only Li Jingji himself knew that this was the 3rd domain technique that he had yet to complete. It was similar to the domain for me, but it was not at the same level. He called it the domain like a blade. In a hurry, all Long Haochen could do was raise his sword horizontally to block the attack. He was indeed a genius of his generation. Even at this critical moment, he still managed to complete the defensive stance of the divine defense. The cyan light and the purple gold sword light collided in the air. For the first time, the cyan light gained the upper hand. That was clearly a cyan lightning bolt. There were countless beautiful patterns on the lightning bolt. The lightning bolt was surrounded by electric arcs, forcing Long Houchen, who was using the divine defense, to retreat horizontally. The huge sword in his hand was also slowly retracting. At this moment, a terrifying roar was heard from the heavy sword in Long Houchen's hand. It was a roar of indignation and anger after his dignity was offended. The holy armor on Long Houchen's body turned purplish gold at this moment. Then, the shadow of Haoyue appeared behind Long Houchen. On the shadow, the two outermost protrusions gradually broke open and revealed two purplish gold heads. Then, the 8 heads let out a deafening roar. Long Houchen only felt a huge force bursting out from the blood vessels in his body and the heavy sword in his hand at the same time. He roared and slashed with his divine sword. The green lightning finally shattered and was completely devoured by the purplish gold sword radiance. The purplish gold sword radiance went straight for Li Jingji. The attack just now was Li Jingji's last attack. Looking at the purplish gold sword radiance that was a few times stronger than before, Li Jingji sighed. He actually stopped defending and watched the purplish gold sword radiance slash towards him. That was because he knew that even if he defended with all his might, he wouldn't be able to withstand this attack. Buzz, the purplish gold Haoyue sword pointed diagonally towards the sky. Long Houchen's arms were trembling violently. The purplish gold sword radiance that was about to reach Li Jingji rose up and dashed out diagonally. The protective shield of the Sanctuary Alliance's great test field was like a piece of paper to it. It broke through the defense and soared into the sky. Wherever it passed, all the obstructions were reduced to nothingness and disappeared. A halo circulated, and the purplish gold Haoyue sword turned into a purplish gold ray of light and disappeared from Long Houchen's hand. The holy armor on his body also changed into the holy unicorn. Star King used his own body to support Long Houchen so that he wouldn't fall. Long Houchen's face was as pale as paper. With a wah sound, he spat out a mouthful of blood and collapsed beside Star King. The descent of the wind god gradually dissipated, and only Li Jingji was left standing there in a daze. Looking at Long Houchen, who collapsed beside Star King, Li Jingji's eyes were filled with complex emotions. Not only did Long Houchen win the competition, he also won the respect of the audience. The last attack was because Long Houchen used all his strength to change the direction of the attack. That was why Li Jingji was spared. Otherwise, with the destructive power of the purplish gold Haoyue sword, Li Jingji would definitely be dead. Although Long Houchen had collapsed, all the spectators in the surrounding stand stood up and applauded enthusiastically. Li Jingji's daze lasted for a full minute before he gradually recovered. With a trace of disappointment and relief on his face, he slowly walked in front of Long Houchen and helped him up. Long Houchen's physique was very strong. With the existence of the Heart of Eternity, his spiritual power was always in the state of recovery. Every time the Heart of Eternity beat, it would help him recover a considerable amount of spiritual power. Therefore, although his internal organs felt like they were on fire, he didn't faint. You win. Li Jingji nodded at Long Houchen. You already have the qualifications to challenge the Demon Emperor. The future of the Temple League will be based on you. I believe that you will definitely be able to lead the Alliance out of its low point and completely change this dark age. After saying this, Li Jingji patted Long Houchen's shoulder and turned to walk out of the arena. Although the individual competition was only the first of the 4 rounds of the temple tournament, Li Jingji's mentality had undergone a complete change after losing to Long Houchen. He was very clear that after the end of the first round, Light of Dawn's position had been completely established. Long Houchen supported Star King and slowly walked out of the arena. Kai Er and her companions were all waiting there. When Long Houchen stepped out of the light screen, Kai Er immediately came up to him and hugged him tightly. After working hard for so long, Long Houchen's plan was finally nearing completion. Round 6. First match, Long Houchen won. Round 6, second match, Kai-Er against the last remaining knight of Knights Templars. Because this holy knight had used too much energy in the previous battle, he finally chose to withdraw from the competition. Kai-Er won without a fight. Round 6, third match. Wang Yaoyuan against Lin Xan. Although Brother Yao was extremely unwilling, he finally admitted defeat under Wang Yuanyuan's threatening gaze. At this point, the first 6 rounds of the individual competition had all ended. Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had obtained a terrifying result in the top 3 with astonishing strength. In the 6th round, every winner would obtain 32 points. At this point, the individual ranking was Light of Dawn Monster Hunters 256 points, Magic Temple 105 points, Knights Templars 98 points, Soul Temple 58 points, Assassin Temple 34 points, Warrior Temple 24 points. However, this was not the end of the competition. At the end of the 6th round, Long Haochen, Kai-Er, and Wang Yuanyuan stood on the field at Chen Zidian's request. Long Haochen, Kai-Er, and Wang Yuanyuan, do the 3 of you still want to participate in the round robin? Chen Zidian asked in a dignified manner. Just as everyone expected, the 3 of them said in unison, yes. The top 3 had 2 choices. One was to obtain all the previous points and end the competition as per normal, and the other was to participate in the round robin. For every win, they would obtain an additional 10 points. There would be a total of 3 matches. If someone could defeat 2 other opponents at the same time and become the final champion, then they would obtain an additional 20 points. This was the additional points, and the round robin was the 7th round of the competition. In other words, the final champion would obtain an additional 64 points for the 7th round. Long Haochen said in a clear voice, Chairman, Wang Yuanyuan and I admit defeat in the round robin. Kai stared blankly and couldn't help but look at Long Haochen in astonishment. He was the captain of the Bright Glimmer of Light Demon Hunt Squad. According to reason, he should be the champion of this individual competition. Long Haochen smiled at her and said, During the Monster Hunters preliminaries, you gave up the competition for me. In the end, you were hurt by me. Now, I will return the championship to you. Moreover, in my heart, I will never be able to defeat you. Kai-Er looked at him gently and said, Silly, to me, these things are not important. Long Haochen smiled and said, But to me, they are very important. I don't want any grievances in your memory. There are still many difficulties that we have to face together. I will always protect you with everything I have. No one objected to Long Haochen and Wang Yuanyuan's surrender. This was allowed by the rules, and it could only happen when the top 3 were all from the same temple. In fact, even with the strength of Knights Templars, it had been at least 500 years since the top 3 were from the same temple. Kai won 2 rounds in a row, gaining 2 extra 10 points and becoming the final champion. Adding another 20 points, she still had 64 points for the 7th round. In this way, the Bright Glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad's total points were increased by 96 points. After the first round, the Bright Glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad's total points reached an astonishing 352 points. The first of the 4 rounds of the temple competition, the individual competition, came to an end. The Light of Dawn Monster Hunters became the biggest winner. At this moment, the powerhouses of the 6 temples stood up and applauded for the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters. Even the legendary Almighty Chen Zidian and Yang Haoyu did the same. The Light of Dawn Monster Hunters went from being mysterious at the beginning to becoming the champion. Perhaps there was a certain element of luck in their victory, but it was more of a reflection of their own strength. Take a look at these youths. Among them, the oldest was only in his 30s, while the youngest was only about 25. With such a demon hunt squad, they already stood at the peak of humanity. On their bodies, the halo of hope was unceasingly shining. Night fell. After returning to the headquarters of the Covenant Alliance, the members of the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had a big meal together to celebrate winning the individual competition. After that, They returned to their rooms to cultivate. After all, the temple competition had just begun. Although they were currently leading by a few points, the 6 temples still had a chance to make a comeback in the following matches. The pace of the temple competition was very fast. Tomorrow would be the second round of the competition with the highest spiritual power. They had to maintain their best condition. The 3 people who participated in the competition were undoubtedly Long Haochin, Kai-er, and Chinning-er. In terms of overall spiritual power, they didn't have much of an advantage. However, one mustn't forget about their age. According to the rules, with the age of 100 as the base, 1 year younger would be able to increase their spiritual power by 1,000 points. For every year older, it would decrease by 1,000 points. Long Haochin and the other 2 would be able to increase their spiritual power by more than 200,000 points. It was equivalent to having an additional domain realm master. Hence, although their individual spiritual power wasn't considered outstanding in the alliance, they still had a certain level of competitiveness. Just when the others returned to their rooms to cultivate quietly, Lin Xian walked out of the quiet room alone and quietly went to the Magic Temple of the Covenant Alliance's headquarters. The guards of the Magic Temple naturally recognized him as the grandson of the Magic Temple's deputy temple master. In addition to the fact that he held an important position in the Magic Temple, no one stopped him. When he arrived at the highest floor of the Magic Temple of the Covenant Alliance's headquarters, Lin Xian stopped in front of a room. After a slight hesitation, he knocked on the door. "Come in." Lin Chen's old voice sounded in the room. Lin Xian pushed the door open and entered. Lin Chen's office was very big. The living room alone was close to 200 square meters. There were leather sofas for guests, and 2 walls were filled with bookshelves. Beside the bookshelves, there was a huge solid wood desk. Lin Chen was sitting behind the desk and reading a magic book. "Grandpa." Lin Xian bowed slightly to Lin Chen and walked to his side. Lin Chen closed the magic book in his hands and raised his head to look at his grandson. He said, "You shouldn't have come. Your Light of Dawn has achieved such a result in the competition. If you return to our magic temple now, it will be easy for people to gossip. It won't be good if your companions find out." Lin Xian laughed and said, "I'm not afraid of gossip. As for my companions, they won't suspect me. I came back openly to see my grandpa, right?" Lin Chen also laughed and said, "Brat, don't give me that. Do you still remember your grandpa? Tell me, why are you looking for me?" Lin Xian laughed mischievously, but didn't directly say anything. His expression seemed a bit hesitant. "Huh, this isn't like you. If you have something to say, just say it. Is there any taboo in front of Grandpa?" After listening to his grandfather's words, Lin Xian seemed to have made up his mind. He said firmly, "Grandpa, I want to learn the Holy Sun incantation from you." "Ah!" Lin Chen was shocked. He stood up abruptly and didn't even realize that his chair had toppled over. Lin Chen stared blankly at his grandson. His aged face twitched slightly because of excitement. He said, You're serious?" Lin Xian nodded his head vigorously and said, "Grandpa, I want to learn the Holy Sun incantation from you. Although I lost my father and mother because of this Holy Sun incantation, there's nothing wrong with the incantation itself. More importantly, I need this power. As my companions gradually become stronger, I also need to continuously increase my own cultivation. This way, I won't fall behind and follow them to fight against the demons. Therefore, please teach me the Holy Sun incantation. I will definitely promote this incantation and use it as a foundation to research my own domain." Lin Chen looked at Lin Xian and didn't say a word for a few seconds. He had long been disheartened. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that his grandson would actually come around and give him such a huge surprise. Over the years, because of Lin Xian's disappearance, although Lin Chen's cultivation had broken through to the 9th stage, his heart was like dead ashes. It had only been a short 5 years, but to him, it felt like 10 years had passed. Lin Xian had finally returned alive. It was as if he had injected vitality into the core of his life. He didn't want to ask for anything more from his grandson. As long as he was alive, everything was fine. Lin Xian gave him an even bigger surprise in the following temple tournament. Today, after just a few years, Lin Xian's cultivation had actually risen to the 9th stage. He wasn't inferior to Lin Qin at all. The strength of the Heart of Flames was also much stronger than before. He even made it to the top 6 of the individual competition in the temple tournament. This kind of achievement was enough to make Lin Qin feel very comforted. Although Lin Xian represented the light of dawn monster hunters, what did it matter? In Lin Chen's opinion, Lin Xian had already walked a path that belonged to him. His grandson was already so powerful, so he was even more unwilling to force Lin Xian to do anything. After all, the Holy Sun spell was a huge knot in Lin Xian's heart. It was already a huge improvement for him to be willing to learn offensive magic now. At this moment, Lin Xian stood in front of him and actually told him that he was willing to learn the Holy Sun spell from him and pass on this spell that Lin Qin had spent his entire life creating. How could Lin Qin not be excited? No, it was no longer simple to describe it as excitement. At this moment, this old man was simply so happy that he was about to faint. Lin Xian supported his grandfather, who was swaying a little, and said with a smile, "Don't be so excited. If anything happens to you, who will teach me the Holy Sun spell? Just wait and see. In the future, I will definitely use the Holy Sun spell that you created to kill everyone. I will kill the demons until they piss their pants. The Dark Age will definitely end. Grandfather, you have to live well and wait for that day to come." Lin Chen's body trembled slightly. He nodded continuously and said, Okay, I will definitely wait for that day. Definitely. Let's go. I will bring you to the testing ground now and teach you the Holy Sun spell." Although it was already nighttime, Lin Chen's excitement made him not feel sleepy at all. He pulled his grandson and walked out. Lin Xian did not have a match the next day. Naturally, he did not mind staying up late. The grandfather and grandson rushed out of the door excitedly and went to the magic laboratory. Not long after they left, a door not far from Lin Chen's office opened. Li Jingji walked out and looked in the direction where they left. There was a look of contemplation in his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking about. The intense individual competition of the temple tournament had ended, but the mood of the people in the sacred city did not relax at all. Instead, they were even more excited. The competition continued. Today, the Temple of the Priests would also participate in the competition. There would also be new changes in the points. After the first round of the spiritual power assessment, the Temple of the Priests' final points were 60, which was not much different from the previous years. Today, there would be a spiritual power competition. Every temple would send out 3 people with the highest spiritual power to participate in this competition. A huge crystal pillar had been erected in the middle of the Holy Alliance's testing ground the night before. It was specially used for the spiritual power assessment. At this moment, the 6 major temple had each sent out 3 people to walk into the field. The Light of Dawn monster hunters were no exception. Chapter 254. In the individual competition, everyone had a good understanding of each other's spiritual power. Therefore, there wasn't much suspense in this spiritual power competition. As the champion of the individual competition, the Light of Dawn monster hunters would be the last to fight. This was one of the privileges they received. Just like the individual competition, no equipment or medicine could be used to increase the spiritual power of the participants. They could only rely on their own abilities. A total of 21 people had already surrounded the crystal pillar and stood in a circle. As the chief judge, Chen Zidian was standing on the side of the crystal pillar. Anyone who took the spiritual power test had to be under his watch, so it was impossible to cheat. Chen Zidian signaled to Qiu Yonghao, the leader of the warrior temple. He said, Based on the ranking of the first round, we will start the spiritual power test from the lowest to the highest. Warrior Temple will conduct the test. Chiu Yonghao nodded. Then he walked up with the two powerful warriors from the Warrior Temple. The Warrior Temple was indeed the weakest among the 6 temples. However, they had the most people among the 6 temples. After all, the requirement to become a warrior was the lowest. Chiu Yonghao walked up first. He raised his right hand and pressed it on the crystal pillar. Instantly, the transparent crystal pillar started to change color. A red color appeared at the bottom of the crystal pillar. It slowly climbed up. When it reached 1/10 of the crystal pillar, the color turned orange. It continued to climb. After 1/10 of the crystal pillar, the orange color turned yellow. The speed at which the crystal pillar was climbing slowed down. Chiu Yonghao's expression became serious. Sweat appeared on his forehead. From the color, one could tell that red represented 100,000 spiritual power points. Orange represented 100,000. Entering the yellow region meant that Chiu Yonghao's spiritual power had exceeded 200,000. He was over 100 years old this year. There wouldn't be too much of an increase in age. He could only rely on his own abilities. Finally, the color of the crystal pillar stopped when it reached more than half of the yellow region. No matter how hard Chiu Yonghao tried, it wouldn't go any higher. Chiu Yonghao sighed. He stopped. A huge golden number appeared at the top of the crystal pillar. 271,364. This was Chiu Yonghao's total spiritual power. Next were the two powerful warriors from the Warrior Temple. Their cultivation level was lower than Chiu Yonghao's. They weren't domain realm masters. Both of them had an inner spiritual energy of around 200,000. In the end, including the calculation of age, the total spiritual energy of the Warrior Temple was 694,160. This result was really not too high. After the Warrior Temple was the Assassin Temple. The Assassin Temple's situation was slightly better. In the end, the total spiritual energy was 783,200. That was pretty good. The Temple of Souls had scored 58 points in the first round, which was slightly lower than the Temple of the Priests, which had scored 60 points. Therefore, they were the third to fight. With the help of Chan Hongba, the Temple Master of the Soul Temple, their total spiritual energy reached 832241, surpassing the previous 2 temples. The Temple of the Priest's score in the first round was a bit of a trick. In the second round, they didn't have an advantage. Ling Xiao and Elder Ling went up together. Together with another domain realm priest, their total spiritual energy barely reached 800,000. However, it was still slightly weaker than the Soul Temple. At this point, the rankings of the 4 temples had basically been determined. Only the Magic Temple, Knights Templars, and Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had not been tested yet. Everyone knew that this was the time to truly decide the victor. In the competition of the highest spiritual energy, no one was optimistic about the bright glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad. Despite having the advantage of age, their overall spiritual energy wouldn't exceed 900,000. It would depend on who would be the first, the Magic Temple or the Night Temple. The Magic Temple sent out Li Jingji, Mo Wu, and the Magic Temple's Earth Magician with the strongest defense. The Dark Magician, Mo Wu, and the Earth Magician both had close to 300,000 spiritual energy. In addition, they were not even 100 years old. After the assessment, the total spiritual energy of the Magic Temple was close to 600,000. Li Jingji was the last to go up. Inside the crystal pillar, the colorful light rose rapidly. Red, orange, yellow, green. When the light pillar finally entered the cyan area, although many people had guessed Li Jingji's cultivation, they still couldn't help but exclaim. This meant that Li Jingji's internal spiritual energy had exceeded 400,000. Finally, the light pillar stopped in the cyan area. Li Jingji's spiritual energy was more than 420,000. Together with the spiritual energy of the previous two magicians, the Magic Temple's total spiritual energy exceeded 1 million. It was 107423. Could the Knights Templars surpass the Magic Temple? Soon, the Knights Templars gave the answer. The Knight of the Seal, Long Tianyin, was not among the 3 Knights Templars. Instead, it was Yang Haoyu who led the team. There was also the shield of the Knights Templars and the one who entered the top 6. As soon as the 3 knights stood there, Li Jingji's face turned ugly. The shield of the strongest was the first to attack. His spiritual energy was fixed at 3221,600. The knight of the top 6 was the second to attack. His spiritual energy was fixed at 332,800. Finally, it was Yang Haoyu's turn. He calmly walked in front of the crystal pillar. He raised his right hand and lightly slapped the crystal pillar. A shocking scene appeared. The colorful light inside the crystal pillar shot up like a geyser. Red, orange, yellow, green, and cyan flashed past and brazenly entered the blue area. The number 1 in the Temple League was not as simple as it seemed. Yang Haoyu used his own strength to defend the dignity of the Knights Templars. His inner spiritual energy was more than 568,000, far surpassing Li Jingji's 420,000. In the end, the Knights Templars surpassed the Magic Temple with a total spiritual energy of more than 1,200,000. After this round, the rankings of the 2 temples would definitely change. The Light of Dawn Monster Hunters was the last to attack. Chunning was the first to attack. She had an innate inner spiritual energy of 170,000. Kai was the second to attack. She had an innate inner spiritual energy of 190,000. At this point, many people were already sighing in their hearts. The Light of Dawn Monster Hunters were still young. In terms of spiritual energy, they really did not have any advantage. Finally, it was Long Haochen's turn to attack. It was also the only bright spot for the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters. As the light from the heart of eternity shone, Long Haochen's innate inner spiritual energy shot straight up to the 300,000 mark. It finally stopped at the 310,000 mark. After these few days of competition and enlightenment, Long Haochen's cultivation had increased again. If he did not include the additional 90,000 inner spiritual energy from the heart of eternity, his own inner spiritual energy had reached about 220,000. In the end, the 3 of them had a total of more than 570,000. At this time, the advantage of age showed itself. Long Haochen was 25, Kai was 24, and Chening was 28. Their additional spiritual energy was as high as 233,000. In addition to their 570,000 points, their final spiritual energy was actually over 800,000. The funniest thing was, perhaps they were blessed by the god of luck. Although their total spiritual energy was inferior to that of the Soul Temple, it exceeded that of the Temple of the Priests. Moreover, their advantage was only a weak 13 points. In the end, in the competition with the highest spiritual energy, the Knights Templars won the first place without a doubt, followed by the Magic Temple, the Soul Temple, the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters, the Temple of the Priests, the Temple of Assassins, and the Warrior Temple. After this competition, the points also changed. According to the rules, the first place would get 200 points, the second would get 150 points, the third would get 120 points, the fourth would get 90 points, the fifth would get 60 points, and the last place would get no points. Because of the addition of the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters, the original 6 parties became 7 parties. Therefore, the 6th place would get 30 points, and the last place would still get no points. The ranking of the points was: the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters had 442 points, the Knights Templars had 298 points, the Magic Temple had 255 points, the Soul Temple had 178 points, the Temple of the Priests had 120 points, the Temple of Assassins had 64 points, and the Temple of the Warriors had 24 points. Although the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters only got the 4th place in this round, because of the huge advantage they had in the first round, they were still far ahead. Under the leadership of Yang Haoyu, the Knights Templars had overtaken the Magic Temple. The Temple of the Warriors was the worst off. They only got 24 points and were at the bottom. In the next 2 competitions, it would be difficult for them to achieve anything. Although the first 2 rounds were tense and intense, the real match that would decide the final rankings would be held tomorrow, because the 3rd round's domain competition was the one that would give the most points out of all 4 rounds. According to the rules, the first place would receive as many as 500 points. Moreover, it was no longer a 6-way competition, but with the addition of the bright glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad as the 7th place, it was very likely that the points would rise. In this match, it was very possible for a situation to turn the tides of the battle. After all, Long Haochen's side only had an advantage of 150 points over the Temple of Knights. Therefore, as soon as today's competition ended, Long Haochen brought his teammates back to the Sanctuary Alliance's headquarters. "Is Lin Xian not back yet?" Long Haochen asked Sima Xian. Sima Xian shook his head and said not yet. Before he left last night, he told me that he was going to look for his grandfather to learn magic. He hasn't appeared since then. Long Haochen nodded slightly. He could vaguely guess what Lin Xian was going to learn, as he didn't need to participate in the 2nd and 3rd rounds of the competition. Lin Xian's absence wouldn't affect the others' participation in the competition. "Captain, let me go tomorrow," Wang Yuanyuan said with a determined gaze. Chuning instantly became anxious. She said, "Yuanyuan, you can't fight with me. In the 3rd round, we are allowed to wear equipment. I have the help of the Soul Saint Garment. I won't be at a disadvantage." In the 3rd round of the competition, each side would send out 3 people. All of them had to be Domain Realm Masters. In the Light of Dawn Monster Hunters, there were 4 Domain Realm Masters. Long Haochen and Kai would definitely be sent out. The 3rd spot would naturally be chosen between Wang Yuanyuan and Chining. These 2 girls usually had a good relationship. However, at this moment, neither of them would give way. Long Haochen smiled and said, "Don't fight. Let me analyze it for you first. You will naturally know who is suitable to go out." The 1st and 2nd rounds of the Temple Tournament are all about individual strength. Moreover, it's purely individual strength. No equipment is allowed. This is an evaluation of the top strength of each temple. As for the next 2 rounds, it's an evaluation of the overall strength of each temple. Thus, in the last 2 rounds, we are only allowed to wear equipment. This will reflect the strength of each temple's equipment. The Magic Temple and the Knights Templars have the strongest foundation. In the 3rd round of the Domain Tournament, we only have one goal, and that is to become the final champion. Hearing Long Haochen's words, everyone couldn't help but feel a little strange. He sounded too confident. The Domain Tournament required strength to activate. Even if they had a few godly weapons, compared to the thousands of years of foundation of the 6 temples, how could they be so confident? Long Haochen continued. "The last round is the team round-robin competition. Among us monster hunters, although our equipment is not bad, it's not perfect. In particular, Wen Zhao, Duan Yi, and Brother Zhang's equipment are relatively poor. Therefore, in the team competition, we need to rely on the cooperation of various professions. I don't have absolute confidence that we can win. In the Domain Tournament, the rewards are the most generous, so we can't give up. The Domain Tournament is purely a competition of domains. At the same time, it's also a competition of domains. The first requirement is that the participating domains can't conflict with each other. They must complement each other. Relatively speaking, my light attribute and Kai Air's purification domain can complement each other. But Yuanyuan's blood domain and Kai Air's purification domain will conflict. Although Ng Er's beast god domain can't complement us, At least it won't conflict with each other. Coupled with the enhancement of the Soul Saint garment, it's more suitable for her to fight. After hearing what Long Haochen said, Wang Yuanyuan was instantly discouraged. Chen Ying giggled and made a funny face at her. Han Yu said, "Boss, tomorrow's domain tournament is very important. Should we practice it first?" Long Haochen shook his head and said, "There's no need. Don't worry, I'm really confident. As for where this confidence comes from, let me keep it a secret first. You'll know tomorrow." As he said this, a mysterious smile appeared on his face. It wasn't that he didn't want to say it, but if he revealed this secret, his partner's expressions would definitely change. Although his method couldn't be considered cheating, it was better not to let others see through it. Even when they set off for the Sanctuary Alliance's great trial field the next morning, Lin Xian still hadn't returned. Long Haochen didn't send anyone to look for him. Although Lin Xian's character was a little erratic at times, he was still reliable. Long Haochen believed that he would definitely return for tomorrow's team competition. After a few days of repair, all the demonic crystal fields outside the Sanctuary Alliance's great trial field had been repaired. The Sanctuary Alliance's headquarters wasn't too far from the Sanctuary Alliance's great trial field. There was a path specially made by the soldiers to allow the participating powerhouses of the 6 major temples and the Light of Dawn monster hunters to head to the great trial field for the competition. The human wall formed by the soldiers was already filled with people. As soon as they saw Long Haochen and the others, cheers sounded instantly. Light of Dawn, Light of Dawn, Light of Dawn. The order of the people wasn't chaotic. Although there were many people, their cheers were so uniform. Their eyes were filled with fanaticism, and their cheers were even more enthusiastic than when they saw any of the participating powerhouses of the temple. Over the past few days, with the intentional promotion of the Knights Templars, the achievements of the Light of Dawn monster hunters had spread throughout the Holy City and to all the cities and towns in the Temple League. They had beheaded numerous demon gods and had once turned the tide in the sacred war several times. Most importantly, they were the first demon hunt squad to defeat a demon god pillar. They had already destroyed 2 demon god pillars. Even humans who didn't understand the demons knew that the 72 demon god pillars were the foundation of the demons. The Dark Age had lasted for 6,000 years, but the demon god pillars had never been broken. Now that the Light of Dawn monster hunters had destroyed 2 of them, what did it mean? It meant hope. Feeling the cheers of the populace, every member of the bright glimmer of Dawn Demon Hunt Squad was filled with fervor. For the sake of the Alliance, for the sake of leading humanity out of the darkness, they had to fight bravely. They had to make themselves stronger. After stepping into the great trial field of the Sanctuary Alliance, Long Haochen nodded to his partners and walked into the field with Kai and Qining. They were considered early. In the field, only the people from the Temple of Souls and the Temple of the Priests had arrived. The other major temples hadn't arrived yet. The leaders of the Temple of Souls and the Temple of the Priests were Chun Hongba and Elder Ling, respectively. Long Haochen smiled and nodded to the 2 of them as a greeting. Elder Ling returned the smile, but Chun Hongba snorted. Clearly, he was still a little unconvinced that he had lost to Long Haochen. Chen Ying said angrily, "Grandpa, what are you snorting for? You are already so old. Can't you afford to lose?" Chen Hongba glared at her and said, "Girls can't be kept at home when they grow up. Girl, it's fine if you don't contribute to the Soul Temple, but you are helping outsiders to suppress Grandpa." Chen Ying giggled and ran to Chen Hongba's side. She hugged his arm and acted like a spoiled child. She even pulled his beard from time to time. Chen Hongba didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His expression softened, and he lowered his head to whisper something in Chen Ying's ear. Chen Ying said proudly, "I knew that you have a sharp tongue but a soft heart. It's obvious that you mean well, but you don't know how to express it properly. I know that Grandpa treats me the best." Chen Hongba said seriously, "This is not for your own good. It is for the future of the Soul Temple. Girl, times are different now. You have grown up. Remember your responsibilities. Yes. Qin Inger stood at attention and saluted. However, when she turned around and ran back to Long Haochen's side, the playful smile on her face once again revealed her true thoughts. In any case, she had never really been afraid of Chen Hongba since she was young. Chen Hongba shook his head helplessly. No matter what, the decision had been made and couldn't be changed. It seemed that his precious granddaughter would never be able to become the leader of the Light of Dawn. It didn't take long for the participants of the other temple to arrive. The participants of the realm battle were slightly different from the day before, but not too different. However, the changes in the venue were not small. The tall crystal pillar from yesterday had disappeared and was replaced by a huge crystal ball. This crystal ball had a diameter of more than 5 meters. It was definitely a huge object in the center of the venue. There was a base at the bottom of the crystal ball. It looked like it was carved out of jade and was in the shape of a hexagram. The crystal ball itself was light blue, and there were faint, strange spiritual waves emitting from it. Long Haochen had already learned from his grandfather that this crystal ball was called the Holy Pearl. It wasn't a godly artifact, but it was better than one. The Holy Pearl was made of a special crystal that could withstand an extremely large amount of spiritual power. After being modified by a magic array, the Holy Pearl's interior was extremely stable and had the ability to assimilate any elemental fluctuations. To put it simply, this Holy Pearl was a godly artifact that had been solidified with the elemental Decay Halo. Moreover, this ability was similar to the elemental Decay Halo. Even the Demon Emperor wouldn't be able to break it from the inside with his spiritual power. Of course, the Holy Pearl's ability to withstand spiritual power also made it relatively vulnerable to physical attacks. The Holy Pearl had a practical use. Under the right control, it could be used in battle, and it had the power to devour forbidden spells. It had always been controlled by the leader of the Sanctuary Alliance. However, the 6 temples were at odds with each other. Although the Holy Pearl had a good effect, it was still not allowed to be taken out of the Holy City due to its symbolic significance. It could only be used as the Holy City's ultimate defensive weapon. Long Haochen's spiritual power was far beyond that of ordinary people. He stood in front of the Holy Pearl and silently sensed the changes within it. Very soon, a look of shock appeared on his face. This was because he couldn't feel the existence of any spiritual power inside the Holy Pearl. However, once his divine sense entered it, it would be devoured by the Holy Pearl. In other words, the Holy Pearl could not only devour spiritual power, but also mental power. Even with Long Haochen's powerful mental power, he felt as if he had entered a vast and boundless ocean when he entered it. If used properly, this Holy Pearl would definitely have an unexpected and excellent effect when facing a strong enemy. It was just like when Long Haochen was targeted by the Demon God Insight's spirit-inducing technique. If he had this Holy Pearl, he would have been able to break the opponent's spirit-inducing technique in an instant. Even the Demon God Insight would have been severely injured due to the excessive devouring of its mental power. Just as Long Haochen was thinking about the use of the Holy Pearl, the chief referee, Qin Zidian, had already arrived. He glanced at the 21 people standing around the Holy Pearl and nodded. "Are you guys ready?" Long Haochen returned to his senses and replied respectfully along with the others, "Ready." Qin Zidian said in a deep voice, "Begin." As he spoke, he patted the Holy Pearl with his right hand, and a gentle light element was injected into the Holy Pearl. The Holy Pearl instantly turned pale gold and slowly rose from the base. Only then did Long Haochen realize that the base was actually not to enhance the Holy Pearl, but to restrict it. The moment the Holy Pearl rose, a terrifying devouring aura was emitted from it. Long Haochen finally understood why the Holy Pearl was used in a domain battle. If he didn't use his domain, the spiritual power in his body would be sucked out by the Holy Pearl's devouring power. This was the first time he had seen such a situation. The seemingly peaceful Holy Pearl was more terrifying than any of the divine weapons he had seen before. Tyrannical spiritual power fluctuations circulated in the air. Long Haochen took a step forward, forming a triangle with himself, Kai, and Chunning. At the same time, a layer of golden brilliance was also released from his body, enveloping the three of them. Both of his palms struck forward at the same time, and the golden light of the light god's domain was instantly injected into the holy pearl. Strangely enough, when his domain entered the holy pearl, the devouring power on the front was suddenly weakened a lot, and the color of the holy pearl on his side also turned golden. The powerhouses of the 6 major temples also released their own domains and injected them into the holy pearl. For a moment, under the effect of these powerful domains, the holy pearl became colorful and gorgeous. However, Long Haochen soon felt the pressure. The pressure came from the holy pearl. The holy pearl's absorption of the domain was very strong, but the only benefit was that when the domain power was injected into the holy pearl, Long Haochen's spiritual power entered the holy pearl along with the domain. In this way, he had the ability to withdraw. In other words, when he couldn't bear the devouring power, he could control his domain to leave the holy pearl at any time. However, if he did that, it would mean that his domain battle was over. Long Tianyin had told him that once he withdrew his domain, he would have to bear the impact of the other domains in the holy pearl. He would directly leave the holy pearl's range, and it would be impossible for him to enter it again. The pressure that the holy pearl brought to Long Haochen wasn't much. His light god domain was at a very high level, and his self-control was very strong. Thus, although there was pressure from the holy pearl, it only consumed his spiritual power. The more powerful pressure came from the domain masters of the 6 major temples. At this moment, it was a chaotic battle inside the holy pearl. After their domains entered the holy pearl, they could only control them to leave at any time, but they couldn't control their domains to attack or defend inside the holy pearl. Thus, the 21 domains began to fight with each other inside the holy pearl. At this time, cooperation was very important. The 3 domains of each side didn't inject into the domains separately, but at the same time. When the domains were injected, they maintained a connection. After entering the holy pearl, this connection would continue. Kai, and Chunning also activated their own domains. Kai, purification domain almost instantly completed the integration with Long Haochen's light god domain, while Chunning, beast god domain surrounded the outside. The power of the soul saint garment was undoubtedly evident. At this moment, the combined domains of the 3 were like a monster inside the holy pearl. The inside was filled with the power of light and purification, while the outside was filled with tens of thousands of beasts. No matter which temple's domain attacked, it would immediately be swept away, and the impact would be quite strong. Don't forget Long Haochen and the other 2 could use equipment now. Kai was using the Grim Reaper scythe. With the enhancement of the blade of purification, the destructive power of her purification domain would definitely increase exponentially. As for Chunning, the soul saint garment provided her with an almost infinite amount of spiritual power. In terms of sustained combat power, even Long Haochen with the heart of eternity could not compare to her. As for Long Haochen, he was fully equipped with the fine gold foundation armor and the holy unicorn. If it wasn't for the fact that Haoyue's ability was too overbearing and he was afraid that it would affect the integration of the 3 domains, he would have even summoned Haoyue. For Long Haochen, the biggest enhancement was not the holy unicorn or the fine gold foundation armor, but the sun-moon divine snail shield in his left hand. A soft 7-colored light was constantly released from the sun-moon divine snail shield, fully enhancing Long Haochen's light god domain. The light spiritual power in the sun-moon divine snail shield was as pure as Long Haochen's own, and it had a unique advantage in terms of defense. With its enhancement, the joint domains of Long Haochen and the other 2 could be said to be impregnable. The 3 of them had 3 artifacts, which was rare even in the 6 great temples. In a domain battle, the most important thing was not how to attack, but how to defend. The inside of the Holy Pearl was chaotic, and no one could control their own attacks. Only by making their own defense as strong as possible could they last longer in the Holy Pearl and get a better ranking. In a situation where they could use their equipment, the foundation of the 6 great temples was revealed. The leader of the Knights Templars participating in this battle was none other than Long Tianyin. Beside Long Tianyin stood Yang Haoyu and the strongest shield knight. Long Tianyin's throne of God was naturally an artifact, and Yang Haoyu had the enhancement from the starry sky beast, so he was undoubtedly an artifact as well. The strongest shield knight held a huge, heavy shield in his hand. The heavy shield was 3 meters tall and 2 meters wide. The terrifying tower shield emitted a dark golden luster, and within the dark golden luster, there were some 7-colored halos flashing. A artifact shield, other than his own sun-moon divine snail shield. This was the first time Long Haochen had seen an artifact shield. There was no doubt that the 3 Knight Templars each had an artifact for this domain battle. Moreover, the reason why the Throne of God was so famous in the Temple League was not only because it was an artifact, but also because it was a set. Now, inside the Holy Orb, the seemingly most powerful domain was formed by the 3 Knight Templars. In terms of spiritual energy, they collectively had more than 1 million. In terms of equipment, they had 3 artifacts. In terms of realm, they had the strongest knight, Yang Haoyu. With these factors added together, the 3 Knight Templars were in an invincible position. Compared to their domain fusion, the other domains didn't seem as powerful. Second only to the Knights Templars was the Magic Temple. The 3 magicians all held a staff in their hands. The green staff in Li Jingji's hand also emitted a 7-colored luster. It was obviously an artifact. At the same time, the green magic robe on his body was the same. In other words, he was wearing 2 artifacts. However, his 2 assistants didn't have artifacts, but they were both wearing epic-level equipment, which was a pretty good enhancement. The strength of these 3 magicians was different from that of the 3 Knight Templars. In the beginning, after they injected their domains into the Holy Orb, they didn't have much of an advantage. However, they kept chanting their spells. Long Haochen's mental strength was strong enough. While he was controlling his own domain, he still had spare energy to feel the changes in the other joint domains. He realized that the 3 domains on the side of the Magic Temple were rapidly merging under the chanting of the 3 magicians. They became closer and closer, and there were even signs of sublimation. What a great magic sanctuary! They were using the characteristics of magic to form a domain similar to that of mixed magic. No wonder Li Jingji was so fearless. He had indeed made ample preparations for every battle. The other temple also had their own strengths. However, compared to the Magic Temple and the Knights Templars, they were lacking. The Warrior Temple was still the most miserable. It had to be said that there was a reason why the Warrior Temple was at the bottom. With Qiu Yonghao as the leader, the 3 people who participated in the battle at the Warrior Temple didn't even have epic-level equipment. They even had legendary-level equipment. This was really shabby. After all, they had gathered the power of the Warrior Temple. Therefore, among the 7 merged domains, the Warrior Temple seemed the weakest. However, because Qiu Yonghao's sword domain was quite sharp, it could still be maintained for a while. Long Haochen wasn't anxious at all. With a calm smile on his face, he controlled his merged domain to a corner. As Chuning, Er's beast god domain, was on the outer layer, her consumption of spiritual power was much greater than that of Long Haochen and Kai. However, she had the Soul Saint garment, so there wouldn't be any problems in a short period of time. At the same time, with Chun Ing Er's protection, Long Haochen and Kai Er's consumption of spiritual power was reduced to the lowest level. Chun Hongba and his 2 companions were also helpless as they maintained their merged domains. From time to time, they would look at Chun Ing Er and feel bitter. If this girl was on his side with the Soul Saint garment, Chun Hongba would definitely have the confidence to fight against the Knights Templars and the Magic Temple. His Beast King domain could easily merge with the other two summoners' domains. If Chen Ying, or his Beast God domain and Soul Saint garment were added, he could even use the stampede of beasts inside the Holy Pearl to fight against the Knights Templars and the Magic Temple. However, the only word that could be used to describe it now was the word miserable. The dignified Soul Temple also didn't have a godly weapon guarding it. It could only defend itself and try its best to hold on for as long as possible. Time passed by minute by minute. It had to be said that the 21 domain masters present were all very knowledgeable. In the blink of an eye, 2 hours had passed. Although their expressions were serious, it seemed that none of them were showing any signs of being unable to hold on. Qin Zidian stood at the side and silently watched this battle of domains. The Holy Pearl was indeed strange. With his strength, he didn't dare to easily try to insert his domain into it, especially now that there were 21 domain masters inside the Holy Pearl. However, his spiritual power was also quite strong, so he could more or less feel the 7 domains clashing inside the Holy Pearl. Another 2 hours passed by. At that moment, it was already close to noon. At this time, the advantages and disadvantages could be seen. The most obvious side would always be the weakest side. At that moment, the foreheads of the 3 warrior temple masters were already covered in sweat. Their merged domains inside the Holy Pearl would shake violently every time it collided with another domain. It was obvious that they wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. In this battle of domains, no one dared to force themselves too much. The reason was very simple. If one was not careful and their domain was broken inside the Holy Pearl, then their vitality would be greatly damaged.